Alright, folks. Welcome back, everyone. 皆さん、お帰りなさい。今日は、98日目です。It is day 98. We're starting with Bunpro. Have bit like a little over 2 hours before our Wanikani lesson day. So today we're gonna try to keep it brief for Bunpro. Maybe do some of the reviews, especially the grammar ones. And then move along to Hanzahiro. Squeeze in Hanzahiro before we do the Wanikani lessons. Alright, let's get into our... actually, we had one from yesterday, right? Let's do it with our mouse here. Right. Odoroku. Odoroku. Forced to be surprised. Alright, let's get into our grammar quickly. Another made, even to the extent of. Made and mo. The adverbial particle made is used in the same way as many other adverbial particles, is that it's highlighting that the statement that comes after is as important in some way. However, unlike our first look at made, which just discuss it as until, this use of made has a nuance of even or to the extent of, which is still until me. Interesting. No voice samples here. So, tonari machi no what? Tenbo. Is it tenbo? Merchandise? No? Yes? Oh. Town. No. Store. Tenbo. Interesting. Oh. I mean, it has a hut and... Oh, you know? This... No. That's not a familiar character to me. But it's store. Tenbo made... Itta kedo... Doko... Demo. Soko demo. Interesting. Soko demo. Oh. Meatte no. Okay, I see. That's also a new phrase for me. Guzu. Oh, guzu is merchandise goods. Gutsu wa utte nakatta. So being sold goods, but interesting. But even there, demo, even there. That's interesting. Okay. Not familiar with this phrasing. Okay.
お腹が空きすぎて大嫌いなバナナまで食べた。
Oh, interesting. Yeah, this is our new grammar point for reasonings. Using reasoning. Oh, actually, Yeah. Interesting. All of sugi. Sugiru. Although using made as even may seem different to until, I don't think so. They are essentially the same thing in Japanese. I think they're the same thing, but this is because made always means A, made B, where A is the limitation extent and B is the no worry factor. Yeah. This no worry factor will usually be a descriptive word or phrase such as verb, adjective, or explanation. Okay. Any of the above.
バイクまで持っているの？一回笑ったら面白くない話までおかしくなる。
おかしくなる。Interesting. おかしくなる。Funny. Okay. Let's do vocabulary. The mole particle is sometimes grouped together with made, right? And when the meaning is even, this just adds emphasis to the fact that the event is somewhat surprising or that its result is satisfying. I even have a sports car. I think there is also room to parallel this with actually, the English word actually, because that has become even as well. Like, I actually have a car. You actually did this. Oh, that's actually pretty good. That's actually helpful. It's even as well. I don't necessarily think that actually is even used for it's used separately from like literally or something like, oh, that's actually the truth. It's often used as even. It's used as made. Like, oh, that's actually helpful. Not like it is helpful or in reality it is helpful. It is surprisingly that it is also helpful. Like, it's to the extent of being helpful. Most of the time that word has become this for contrast. Like, oh, hey, that's an actually good game. Right? So I think that's also a made. I wonder where actually is. Huh. Right, made until, that's a related one. And then until something happens. Right, it's until but no further, like to that time of, as far, and then also until something has happened. Or two mades on top of this. 56. And this is still suggesting, oh, you know what this kind of lacks? It kind of lacks the N4, like the N4 markers. Like these are marked, right? So these are all the N5s. And my presumption is that most of these are going to be N4s. And it's looking like they do mark it based on the vocabulary that is marked in your progress, right? In your progress. The thing is, these aren't marked whether they're learned or not, which means that it's kind of weird that they didn't do it where these two things will be registered here. But I kind of know, because I did add the N4 group. So that's kind of a thing too. Not sure why they decide not to include that. Okay, made. Fair enough. I don't require any things for that. Made ni by the time that, yeah, before. Yeah. So this is more like a deadline situation. Made ni is a combination of two different types of particles, the adverbial particle made and the case marking particle ni. Made ni, made ni is very similar to made when it means until. However, there's one very important. The distinction is that made ni means by and not until. It's still until, but that's fine. Like, by something is still until because of English colloquialism. But I can understand from a grammatical standpoint in English that by and until are two different phrases. Because by is at this time, no further as well, and until can be a little bit more flexible, but it still means the same thing. Whether it's not distinction or not. To use made ni, we will need to attach it to the end of a noun or a verb in the non-past form. That's a great distinction between by and until, the non-past phrasing. Because until, you can say something that is in the past. And by is something that is yet to happen. By like a certain deadline, for example.
5時までに駅に来てください。
Yeah, so like the thing before has to be, but in this case it's simply the time. But yeah, so this please come because it hasn't happened yet. And then until something can be described as it has happened to an extent by then. So that's a great distinction, honestly. I didn't consider that.
遊びに行くまでに片付けてね。
Okay. To understand the difference between made and made ni, we need to remember that ni usually marks a target or destination for where something will happen. In this case, made is the target that ni is marking. Yeah, this is due to the fact that made means as far as, and then made is sometimes written using the kanji. Huh. I see. Okay. Especially in older formal texts and newspapers.
来月までにレポートを書く。
I really like this phrasing. I should incorporate that.
来月までレポートを書く。
Yep. Focus is on next month. Until next month. Being the end point for something. And yeah, this is any time, like the month being the deadline. So it's kind of any time before that deadline. Like this by means that it's the deadline that's the most important thing. Get it done by then. And then until means like the span of all of it, right? All of that time until next month. So like it is the end point, but it spans. It'll continue. There's continuous things. Unfortunately, or like fortunately, by and until are in English are colloquially the same, because not because they actually mean the same, but they are inherently behaviorally used as the same thing, because most of the time people are referring to working at the end. It's actually kind of ironic. So like I have until next month to do it. It usually ends up being at the end. The emphasis is the month. Not that English is supposed to be that way, but when someone says, "Oh yeah, I have until Monday to do my homework," they're emphasizing the deadline. Like I have until Monday or until the end of March. And then I have by the end of March. By the end of March to do the homework assignment. It still means that the deadline is the most important phrase. Largely because we have a younger generation and they specifically only talk about the deadline. They rarely emphasize the process. I mean, that's practically my broken record when I'm studying. Most people focus on the deadline. So whether they say by or until, they're focused on the deadline. Like, in order to clarify, sometimes they might clarify if until actually means the whole duration to that deadline. They usually follow it up with a comment like, I better get started now. Or, meanwhile, while I'm doing that, I could do something else to prepare until then. Right. However, most of the time, they're not referring to that. By and until are still referring to the deadline, which is interesting. That's a great way to differentiate it, though. I actually totally understand what they mean now. That's such a excellent way of delineating. And ni is really helpful in that. I wonder how you would do this in English. Outside of using by or until. Like I will write a report by maybe like to expand this, I would say ni is equivalent to the end. The end of. So that would help with identifying between madeni and made alone. So like I will write a report by the end of next month. I am writing a report until next month. So the idea is you have to emphasize that it is the end. Like the end is next month, right? Like, but the thing is, this can be tricky because it could refer to a specific time at the end of the next month. So not the greatest. Not the greatest. That makes sense. How's the pitch on this?
来月までにレポートを書く。
までに So までに Okay. So まで carries instead of までに instead of までに。
来月までレポートを書く。
Okay, alright. In this way, までに more literally means A as far as N marks the target. Yeah, B. Okay, fair enough. Fun fact, originally, まで meant as far as in regard to the passing of a particular event. Oh, okay. However, in modern Japanese, most people assume that the speaker means by the beginning of a. Due to this, sentences that have a very broad event, such as Natsumade ni, could actually be interpreted as by the start of summer or before the end of summer. I see. Depending on who you're talking to. In these cases, it would be better to add a more specific time frame. That is exactly what I was referring to in English. By and until are only segregated as well. I know they're only specifically talking about the segregation of madeni, the phrase, but in English it has to discern. You need context to understand if the person is emphasizing the deadline or a period before a deadline, and up to the deadline, with the following expression, which is it would require a time frame. So in this case, did they give an example? Yeah, not just by winter, but specifically by the end of winter. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and they actually used it. This is what I mean. I didn't even know they were going to mention this. So this is exactly, in my opinion, what English would also do at this point. You have to use the end of something. So in order to specifically either specify or duration of time. Although this is functioning to separate between starts by the start of summer or before the end of summer, which this convolutes with the idea of focusing on deadline. That's what I was worried about. So at first I was thinking, oh, maybe that you should add the end of. You're interpreting this as the end of, but then it could be referring to the specific time frame. So it can create more confusion in English. Weird how these things work. Anyways, 冬が終わるまでにスキーをしたい. Alright. Yeah, English is weird too. I mean, I've got this gives me, every time I do grammar, it gives me a lot of opportunity to reflect on how English have changed. I still use until. So the way to separate between by and until is process, and by is destination, which is appropriate because destination is also ni is the target, and then the lack of is non-specific. So when you do not have a non-ni, it's what is the word? It's exhaustive. So it includes everything. So when you use until made, it's everything up to the deadline. So it's exhaustive. This is non-exhaustive. It specifically is emphasizing the destination. And because of the usual English vernacular, both of these words, until and by, means destination most of the time. Like 80% of the time, I would say people are talking about the destination. So I have until next month to finish the exam. They really actually emphasize that the most important thing is until next month. That is the focus, not all of the time before the next month, right? Which is before the end of something. The reason why I say this is because this is how I speak to people. The most consistent response I ever get when someone says, oh yeah, I have till the end of March to study. I have the end of March to study. Whenever you talk about it, it's like, okay, so what are you doing in the meantime? You have so much time before. It's like, oh, you know, I have until the end of March. And I'm like, okay, that means that you have a lot of time up to the end of March to do something. What are you going to do about it? But they were specifically, their response was that they were just emphasizing that the deadline is March, not that they care or was going to talk about what's happening before March happens. So oftentimes they say bye. If they say bye, then there's no confusion. When they say until, then I have a follow-up question like, okay, so what are you going to do until then? Similar problems. I would say similar convolution in English as well. But the one obviously standing feature is in Japanese, there's a little particle that helps you differentiate them. And this goes back to English being inherently generic now, incredibly generalized. So English requires more explainers, like in order to distinguish between the words. What else we got? Mata. Is it mata or mata or mata? Mata? I think it's mata. Okay, mata or ooh. Right, that is the character, huh? Oh, they're both. Interesting. Even with the one in the dash in the middle. Again, right? Yeah, and also, yep. In its kanji form is an expression which means again, additionally, also, or moreover, right? This may seem confusing at first, not particularly to me, but it may be easier to think of mata as meaning repetition of a. Yeah, it's just again, repeated. So mata, or this character, is repeat whatever's attached to it, as meaning repetition of a, where a is any particular course of action. This repetition is a bit different to English in that it can express the same action or an alternative option. Yeah, I can see that. Can be used as an adverb. Can be used as an adverb or as a conjunction. Actually, I think this is even stronger now. It's not just... I don't think this is a bit different. I think this is dramatically different. Because when someone says again, they... in colloquial English, they pretty much literally means the same thing again. As opposed to again with the possibility of change. Actually, yes, that would... Let's see what they say. Can be used as an adverb or as a conjunction. Okay, in this lesson we will focus on it as a conjunction. A conjunction? As with many other conjunctions in Japanese, a phrase sentence can begin with, right, mata. So as long as that sentence expresses a complete thought. Intriguing. So that means it can also we'll see if they include like a compound sentence or something, a compound phrase.
また遊ぼうね。
Mata sobo ne. Okay, it is mata. So otaka.
また行こうね。
Okay. Due to mata being quite different to any single word that we have in English, let's try to make the meaning a bit clear. Imagine that A action always has B results. That is the thing that I was alluding to. That again means a lot of times. Now, this I disagree with probably coming up. When someone says again now, they mean to repeat the action, but the results are not always the same. Kind of like this. When SRS, when someone says, I'm using space repetition to memorize something, they are doing the same action again. Right? SRS, a repetition, but they are expecting different results. That is the classical now use of the word again. So like, oh, I'm going to repeat this, expecting a different result, not always expecting the same result. I would say repeating would be typically the same result. So this is what I would default to. When you repeat something and you're expecting it to be the same, then you get the same results. That's what you're expecting, not a different result. However, the action will lead to B result could be many things. Because of this, mata can have the following meaning. Yeah, so the same action is taken has a nuance of again or moreover, and a different action, A, is taken has the nuance of also and additionally. Interesting. So this is so this is a little tougher because when someone says I'm going to do it again, my inclination is you're going to do a different A action to get a different B result. So in addition and also, like, hey, I know you failed the exam yesterday. So what are you gonna do when you take the exam again, right? So they're taking the exam, so the action is take the exam. Right. You take the exam. However, when I say again, I mean you're going to take the exam, but you're also going to do the action differently. That will produce a different result. So, however, my experience is when someone says they're going to take the action, take the exam again, they're referring to doing the same action. Oops. They're talking about the same action, but a different result. Because the act of repetition is classically expected to produce a different result. This is it's kind of humorous because Bunpro is an SRS system. This is exactly what the common colloquial English is being used for, SRS. When you repeat something, it creates a different result, often a preferable result in terms of memory. So whenever they say, oh yeah, I'm doing Anki again, the same old, Anki again, the same day again, right? It's the same action, but it produces a different result. It is expected to produce a different result. And for myself, oftentimes when someone says like I failed something or it didn't work, and they're like, oh, I'm going to revisit Wanikani. I'm gonna use Wanikani again. My inclination is that they are referring to doing the same thing and producing a different result. But for me, I typically ask them, oh, so what are you going to do differently this time? Because I'm expecting them to, the act of doing it, they are also doing a different action to create a different result. I don't know if that's the case most of the time, but generally speaking, I would say this is the dominant. Which is interesting because now Japanese has an emphasis on the nature of the action, which is very important because I also think this is very important. When you do something again, I'm typically referring to you're doing the task again, but the action, the nature of the action is no longer the same. At least I like to think. So whenever someone says, I'm going to repeat something, in reality, in my opinion, their intuition would be different the second time around. So even despite them intending to say they're going to do the same action, their results are going to change because their action might not be what they intended. Anyways, that's kind of the idea. So in this case, the same action is taken. So let's see how this works.
またカンニングしたの?
Kaining? Interesting. Kaining. Cunning? Conning? Like cheating as in conning something? Cunning. It could be, so I'm torn between cunning and conning. They both can be fine. I said that, James, thanks. But alright. So I still think conning works better than cunning or cheating, but fair enough. Okay, and then let's see.
彼は宇宙飛行士であり、またアナウンサーでもある。
There is a mole there as well. I mean, this is fine. This is because of the it is not it is not demonstrating what I was talking about earlier. But this is kind of like English, where if you identify another context, so if you add another action, it can be easily identified as having a different action. So if it's a different action, then it's also an additional. Yeah, for me, like this one, you cheated again, right? You cheated again, this would imply the same action, right? So there's no differentiation. There's same action, but it could plus or minus same result. And for me, I can entertain either or. So when someone says like, "Oh, I cheated again," I would ask, "So what happened?" That's my first line of inquisition. So whenever someone says, "Oh, I failed again," so what happened? Because despite what they are inferring to, they're suggesting that it is the same results, but I like to entertain that something different may have happened. Because generally speaking, when someone says they repeated the same action, they typically are expecting a different result. But the catch is when they repeat the same action, they're expecting a positive result. A positive result from a negative result. So they're going from a negative result to a positive result. But if it goes from the expectation of a positive result and it occurs as a negative result, then it is the same. And I ask, so what happened, in order to determine if they are either positive or negative. If they are positive, that means their expectation of a different result occurred. So that's what they meant. If they are negative, they would say it's the same thing. So then it would be a negative result. This is one of the, I would say, a very handy tool. I would say it's about top 10 tools on reading someone in English. This is a flag most of the time. So whenever someone says, "Yeah, I didn't do well again," right? I didn't do well on my exams again, and then you ask them, "So what happened?" And if they don't acknowledge a difference, it means it was negative most of the time. 9 out of 10 times, it means it's a negative result. Because negative results get lumped together. It doesn't even matter if it's worse. Like, if it's worse, it's slightly better. If it doesn't reach a threshold of their expectations of a different result, then all the other thing is irrelevant. That's kind of one of the, in my opinion, one of the tricks, quote unquote tricks. I don't want to sound like someone presenting hacks or something. But when you're talking to someone who has a problem, like they're trying to solve a problem, like get a good grade on the exam, whenever they tell you a result, usually it deals with doing something again, like repeated actions and consistency. So I focus a lot on consistency and repeated actions and habit formation. So this is one of the bigger ones that in English, it requires explanation. Like whether you're trying to choose to differentiate between these things, it requires an explanation in English. So I usually ask what happened. So what happened? Or I wouldn't even say, did the same thing happen? If you say the same thing happened, this is a loaded question. It's a leading question. So you don't want to lead, because if it's negative, well, if you understand that's going to be a positive event, you could lead. So if they say, "Oh, I took the test again. Okay, so what happened? I passed." Then you can lead. "Oh, was it meeting your expectation?" Like, did what you did lead to the improvement or something? So you can lead if you want, if it's positive. If it's negative, I typically don't gamble. So I don't typically gamble. I ask what happened. Here, this is when someone, like, this is expected. So so again leads into the other English term, which is when someone says, oh, I took the test again, I passed. That's and also. So when this again, when again is followed by a positive statement, it's typically going to be and also. That's kind of how I differentiate, even though English doesn't have these equivalents. It is dependent on what comes after. A positive meaning meeting expectations. So the context is meeting expectations. So I took the test again and I passed. That's I took the test again and also I passed. So it's not even again, it's I took the test and I passed, and also I passed, because it met their expectation. It can also be used negative, as long as the expectation is negative. I took the test again and I failed. Meaning I took the test and I failed again. Like also. I failed also. Again. Right? So that's how I would differentiate in English. It's the closest thing to this, like when it comes to like the results, the incorporating results, and then trying to discern between and also. I think in English, most of the time it's dependent on if it's met the expectation of the person. That would be the most classic use. Anyways, this is how I would go, this is how I imagine what they were referring to, where like a different action. So this is far more straightforward than the nuance, the lack of nuance in English. Like the lack of well, in this case there's two separate things, right? There's a follow-up phrase versus there isn't one. However, when you're reading this and this, the assumption here that they're implying is that this has a singular intent, or like a more restricted intent. And then when this is said in English, it can be either of these. You don't know yet. And much like Japanese, it requires an additional qualifier in order to understand that again. So these two things, in my opinion, are similar, but the focus is not on the action, the nature of the action, but on the nature of the results. To me, personally. Now, I'm kind of curious if they have a word that does the other, because so this here is more about results. That's where it would be differentiating the again. So in English, for me personally, when someone says you cheated again, you have to figure out what the results are. If the results are meeting expectations, then it's also. If it is not, then it is implying that everything was the same. So the action, so in both cases, the action was considered the same. These two actions would be the same, and then the results would dictate whether it is again, as in all the same results, or and also, which the results met something else. It's interesting. I don't know enough Japanese grammar to know if they are going to address same action but different results. This is talking about the nature of the action, and then the nature that it is a different action. So two different actions. Anyways, like one same action versus a set of different actions. Hey. Fun. Very fun. I wonder what else I'm gonna... Every day is such an interesting trip down English. I don't know if I'm ever gonna be able to turn like English into something useful, but it is great to reflect on NetSpeak, or my interpretation of current colloquial NetSpeak whenever reviewing Japanese things. It's not necessarily going to help me with learning Japanese grammar, but it is also one of the reasons to learn another language, is to reflect upon your existing language. Yeah, the by thing is definitely it. By and until, that is a big one. I would say 9 out of 10 times people are using by and until the same way. They are referring to the deadline. Whether it's until is bigger. It's my understanding of until, right? For me personally, is exhaustive. Until is exhaustive. By is non-exhaustive. By means that they are specifically referring to the deadline. Until means that is everything until the deadline. So I typically say until, like, oh, how long do you have until the deadline? So even with the word deadline, like, so how much time do you have until you run out of time? As opposed to, by what time do you need to finish this? Despite by and until for most people will mean the same thing, and typically the same thing means referring to the deadline. I have until March. I have by March to finish this project. 9 out of 10 times they're referring to the importance that March is the deadline, not the difference between the two. But Japanese does have that, which is great, because that's cool. And it's linked by single particles, so that's kind of neat. Oh, this is extent.
こっちまでイライラしてきた。
No, we gotta make sure to distinguish between extent and restrictive. Oh, restrictive is a better word, actually. So it's restrictive to the deadline as opposed to showing extent or the scope, right? I was using exhaustive and non-exhaustive because exhaustive means it includes everything, because that's what makes it exhaustive. It includes everything. It's exhaustively all the options. It exhausts all the options. And then non-exhaustive is restrictive. So they use extent and restrictive instead. Sometimes they use exhaustive and non-exhaustive for like possibilities, probabilities. So when a word is exhaustive, it means it includes all the possibilities. And then when it's non-exhaustive, it's specifically talking about a set of possibilities. Which I like the word restrictive and extent or scope or range. Until is a range. By is like within whatever is after. Like it is that after. It can still be by a range. So that's kind of why restrictive is pretty good. I like restrictive far more than my original use of exhaustive and non-exhaustive. Restrictive because you can say by April through March. So you can still restrict something to a range. So that can be problematic by the way I said exhaustive and non-exhaustive, because something can be more exhaustive and non-exhaustive despite being restrictive, because it could be the entire range too. which is it's like a tangential point. I think I'm being a little far too pedantic about English, but generally speaking, restrictive is also similar to inclusive, as in whatever comes after, it is restricted to the inclusion of what comes after. So restrictive and inclusion is another way, like within. And then the other one is like a broader range instead of inclusive. Or actually, yeah, that's inclusive and exclusive would be terrible word, because it depends on whether the object is the including part or the object is the scope. So I do like restrictive and extent, which is a pretty dead giveaway as well. Anyways.
明日までに電話をください。
And then we have again. Okay.
また寝坊したの？
So we have previously mentioned. And then what would they say for the other thing? Interesting. It'll be curious to see how they express it in English. I'm very invested in consistently drawing comparisons between English and Japanese until otherwise mentioned if I can even understand how to describe Chinese in this. In most cases, these things like mata and like made, Chinese is like almost completely contextual. So in most cases, when you're talking about this, like again, I would say the closest thing I can think of is they would have words instead, and they would have multiple words of again. So like again 1, again 2, again 3. And they would be 3 different agains. So they would be 3 permutations with like different characters. I think that's probably the closest thing for some of these. The reason why is each of the agains will have the built-in grammar. I think that happens more often in Chinese. So all of these agains will be different characters, different like pronunciation, like tones, etc. They would be different set of characters, and all of them would have built-in grammar, as opposed to using the same thing and then relying it on context for that reason. So like English again means a lot of things, in my opinion. Again is even more, I would say colloquial English is even more condensed now. Again, like same action, again can mean same action, same results. Different action, different results. And then you have same action, right? Same action, different results. And then different action, right? Different action, same results. So all of that is again in English. However, there is a preference. There's a preference. It's usually same action, different results. Same action, same results. These would be the primary use. And then these would be secondary use. I would say different action, same result comes third, and then different action, different result comes fourth. So that would be the order for again. in Chinese, my inclination, which again, my grammar is non-existent. Well, it's kind of hard to know the reason behind why I feel like I understand the grammar in Chinese, but not at the same time, is because of this. It would have different agains. You would have different agains used based on the context of the sentence. And that again would produce the grammar. Or quote unquote, you could call it grammar, I suppose. But it's more like the usage of the word. It feels like more the usage of it. So when you learn the agains, the different agains, you're going to have the usage of those agains. So it's kind of like, instead of saying mata, right? Instead of saying mata, it could be like, I don't know, suta or something. Or it could be like, I don't know, it could be something like mata versus mata. And those would be different characters. They would have different characters. And they would also have different tones, which is the only way I can illustrate a different tone is change the pitch accent, right? Mata, 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 mata. So that would be how I would say the closest thing I understand, being a novice, right? An incredibly novice Chinese speaker that is a heritage speaker. I think in terms of heritage speaking, the idea is you simply know what the word you're going to use, and in English it would translate as again, again, and again. So like Chinese, you would kind of find out that there are 4 different agains, or the 4 different outcomes somehow. And that's kind of how it feels in Chinese. And whenever you're translating, you feel that too. Like, okay, this means what? Oh, it means stem. It's like, what does this one mean? Oh, it means stem. Oh, that one means stem too? Okay. That's kind of what it feels like a lot of times. Like, oh, this is sleep. Oh, well, that's sleep too. Like, okay, so this is sleep too. And then you're like, I don't understand. So then you have bed, and you have like 4 beds. I'm like, okay, so does this sleep go with this bed? Or when does this... That's what I feel about Chinese grammar. Like, oh, okay. There are grammar points though. Chinese does have grammar. They're a very specific grammar, and they're pairing words up based on them. So there's no like, how you say, like a particle system, or like a helping, like a helping verb system. Something that causes a constant use. There, not as much. There are like shi, right? I'm just gonna write shi this way because I'm not sure if there are multiple shi. So shi like is, and then there's like very, and there's like intensifiers, like 没有 not, have, like 不, right? Not. So those things still exist. I just find that eventually you get to a nuance where like, not all the words have nuances. They just simply act on their feature. It's so interesting. I hopefully I can learn enough Chinese grammar in the future, or like understand Chinese enough to like draw comparisons as well. I would love to go through a Chinese grammar source, but I haven't really thought about what type of grammar source we're gonna do other than going on like the Chinese wiki and just read the stuff. Alright, anyways, let's go through our vocabulary very quickly. I don't think we're gonna do any review today in the interest of time. Do our grammar lesson, and our grammar reviews. We'll do our grammar lessons and our grammar reviews. what is this? So we're gonna go through and look at the characters, specifically the characters and the kana first, and then we come back around, read the definitions, see if anything interesting comes up, right? So for this one is okureru, probably, for oku being slow, right? So this is to be late. Okureru. Chi is the onyomi. So that's what I mean by character reviews. So when we do character reviews, we're talking about what we learned from Wanikani. This is to identify the character, right? And then the new thing for Bunpro is that I am going to try to take accounting of the kana, because the kana is necessary to understand which vocabulary. And that is part of grammar. Like transitive and intransitive relationships help you with the ending. Grouping the different endings can give you these transitive and intransitive pairs. So that's kind of like a new step that is necessary, or like that I'll develop in this year at some point. So right now, that's kind of what we're doing on the first set. I'm rehearsing this so that I can explain it better in June, right? The end of the N4 set, how I would break it up, or how I am breaking it up. So the routines, so that I don't lose my Wanikani routine and my Duolingo routine. So this is what we're doing. So oku, which is chi, right? So okureru. I think the vast majority of the vocabulary that Bunpro picks, I have come under the impression that the vocabulary, like the N5, N4, etc. vocabulary, is a little bit tweaked by the Bunpro team, because there are comments made about the N1 and the N2, etc., like what to include and whatnot. It's about frequency in the exams that they come up with. And this, it appears that many of the vocabulary tends to be, like, when it comes to character reads, they are favorably in the kunyomi reads, at least in my opinion, very noticeable. So hence now I'm doing the opposite routine. I basically think of the kunyomi and relate it back to the onyomi, as opposed to Wanikani. Wanikani is all, I would say 80% plus. I talked to Gecko before about this, because Gecko has used Wanikani extensively and then done others. In Wanikani, it's onyomi first. Onyomi is the basis, and then it moves to kun. Kuns are the exceptions, because in terms of entry, there are often fewer kun entries than onyomi. But since Bunpro's, like, looking through Bunpro's vocabulary, kuns tend to take priority before on. So it kind of gives me the opportunity to associate kun back to the, and how I'm doing that is specifically just outputting it. I'm not like creating a reverse mnemonic. Mnemonics can go in forward and backwards direction too. You could use the mnemonic basis of the kunyomi to remind yourself of what the onyomi is, and the other way around. It's actually very important to understand this. It's kind of like saying, if you go from English to Japanese and you're like, oh, now I know Japanese, it's easy to go from Japanese to English. That's not true. It might be easier to know that you already have the basis of both of them, but we still have to remember that while it's easier from an input perspective, an output perspective is still required to complete the loop. And in this case, when you're spending a lot of time thinking this is reciprocated, it's not true. Like, I don't think it's true. It's sufficient. The easier part is it's sufficient to do it. It's not going to feel that way. Like when suddenly all you see here is English, and then you're asked to produce the Japanese. Not if you know it, because if you know it, that's fine. If you know it, you know, you've seen it before, you've seen these two things in the same room, right? If you've seen all of this, it's noticeably easier. When your reading comprehension is that you can read English and you can read Japanese, it's extra easy. And then when you connect these two juxtaposed to each other, it can help you go forward and backwards. But output requires recall. Output requires active recall, not passive recall. This is passive recall when you're looking at the relationships between things, which in reality, that's usually what happens. You know, when you talk to someone, it's in the context of a lot of things. So a lot of things create a passive, it helps you with the passivity of recalling something. And then the active recall is bolstered. In this case, when you break it down to specifically if it's there or if it's not, you'll probably come to realize that output is directional. Output is by feeling. It's incredibly directional. So if you're playing, you know, if you're playing a game, that this happens and people mention all the time. If you're playing a game and the UI is in Japanese, right? And then you're asked to explain it in English, it might be easier because your output direction was to read Japanese and then translate it. But if the game was placed in English, and since you already know your Japanese, right? Like for most people who say like, oh yeah, I already input like all the time. And then you're asked to read the game in English and output it in Japanese, that would definitely yield a different result than doing it this way. So as much as I like to, I don't want to rain on people's parades, I'm going to speak for myself. I do something really well, it doesn't mean the opposite is going to do really well personally. So I like that Bunpro is having me read the English, or like, I don't know, for CI, like, you know, they have a Japanese sentence, it's a blank Japanese sentence. So I'll read what I easily can define a lot of times because of Wanikani's character studies. And then there's a gap. I read the sentence and then I look at the gap. I'm like, okay, so I understand this. So it's got to be something. Then I read the English. Double check that usually there's an English sentence underneath. Double check that all the other things are good. And then look at the blue targeted word. And then go back up into it. So this is creating different flows. The flow is that I'm confirming all the stuff that I've been working on in Wanikani, not the grammar, because I'm still working on the grammar. So as long as I know all the individual words that are in the sentences because I've used Wanikani, that's fine. Then I look down here, I could guess at the relationship up here, then confirm their relationship in the sentence in English, and then go back up. So then I'm doing all my routines. This is the comprehensive workflow. Your output is directional. I disagree with this might be a slight hot take. I'm not saying it's more important. So we're not making it a competition whether input is more important than output. I'm kind of really, it's whatever you believe in. That's perfectly fine. I feel that input and output are very dependent, are strongly motivated by feeling, and feeling that deals with intuitive experiences. That's kind of how when someone says, oh, input is more important, output is more important, I think most of the time it deals with feeling and experiences, not necessarily trying to quantify if the actions of input is objectively more demanding than the actions of output, like categorizing them, and from like a linguistic standpoint or some learning pedagogics standpoint. I'm not an expert in pedagogics. However, when someone tells me, oh, output is so much easier than input, my first thought is, that's going to be a really interesting experience you're going to have in another 2 or 3 years when you decide to output. And then when you decide to output, it's going to be directional. Because if someone tested you, the person would make an argument that the natural output is the only output that's important. And I agree with them. Because if they can tell me that the only thing they need to do is to speak in Japanese, think in Japanese, and talk in Japanese, yes, the directional output is the singular one-way directional output is a means to an end. In fact, once you go from English to Japanese, right, then your output is cyclic in itself, so you remove English. That's now the question is, did your output improve? The answer is yes, singularly in one direction. It doesn't improve in the other direction. Rarely does it significantly improve in the other direction. It actually diminishes over time because you don't output is directional. Like if you run a lot and then you suddenly stop running and then you decide to walk most of the time, it's not like your running is getting better because you're walking. Rarely is that the case. It usually diminishes over time. Like if you do a lot of I'm using like physical ones because it's a little bit easier to identify with output. It doesn't mean that you can't train that. There's overlapping things. They do overlap. Walking and running overlaps. So your running can improve to some extent, an extent that is sufficient. So right, when someone says, oh, just walk a little before you run, right, and then before you sprint, right, so there is sufficiency. And I agree with all the theories that when you input, it may be argued that it's sufficient to produce output in all directions. So like your overall output will go up and it's sufficient to promote all directional output. So if you learn from English to Japanese and then Japanese to Japanese, learning a bunch of Japanese could still help you output English down the road when you need to explain Japanese in English, right? It might be sufficient still then. The maintenance of output is most dramatically improved by the practice of it. That's what makes output unique, in my opinion. The unique thing between input and output is output is nearly exclusive to experience. Like what I mean is input has experience, but the amount of output requirement in terms of like its directionality and whatnot, it requires more. The output feels not great because I feel like when you think about input, when you use English to learn Japanese, by input standards, the reverse is also true. Like, I'm not saying that this is literally the truth. I'm saying what people think is happening. When you understand English and its relationship with Japanese, then it is reciprocated. As in, when you need to do the action, the output action, it is easy both forward and backwards. For me, if you ask someone to do it, that is not the reality. It does not track most of the time. That's like kind of saying if you can go forward, you can go backwards. Have you tried that? if you always walk forward, then clearly you can walk backwards. Right? Like, if you understand the mechanics of walking forward, you would think that you would understand the mechanics of walking backwards. So that's input. That's the concept of input. It's reciprocated. And output is not that. And that's where this all comes in. Like, I like delving into what I can do differently, quote unquote, to like tie it back to the made, to the the mata. So when I'm studying vocabulary again, what do I mean? The nature of my actions is different. And therefore, I expect a different result. In English, most of the time when someone says, oh, you're reviewing N5 again, they're talking about same action. Expecting same result. To indicate this is the second most common use, which is from an experienced person. An experienced person would typically insist that the same action, there's the same result, right? And that would be their metric that they would measure. The first one is often when someone says, oh, I'm doing N5 again, they're going to say, oh, are you trying to improve? That's the typical way, which is when someone says, oh, you're studying Wanikani again. That means you're trying to improve. The expectation is you're trying to improve by doing the same action. Just to relate back to everything else. Anyways, that's kind of what this gets me to think about most of the time. Because technically, this is the third time I'm going to do the same thing with my N5, N4 vocabulary. Because this also came up in Duolingo. This is the third year. It's the third time that I'm going over N4 vocabulary. So, but this third time is their actions are both same and different. The idea is I'm going to do what I have done for Duolingo and Wanikani and then add to Bunpro and like to see what's missing in the output stage involving output, and then I try to do all of them in a way that they are layered on each other. So I'm not saying go out and spend like 100 times treating this like Duolingo and 100 times doing Wanikani. You don't need 100% of your thing anymore. Output is based on experience. So your experience leads to maintenance. And maintenance is, in my opinion, based on momentum and consistency, not based on overall knowledge. Like input, you can constantly tell yourself like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what this is, but I forgot it. Output. Personally. So others would say, oh no, we'll just do more inputs. And I'm like, okay, do you mean do more of the same input? Or do you mean output something to determine a new input? Because they're related to each other now. So when you're saying, oh, I'm just going to immerse, right? Just immerse. I'm like, do you mean immerse in different ways that are informed by your previous ways of immersion? Because that involves output. That doesn't involve exclusively input. If you truly believe that You can go to one source and consistently do the same thing and input the same way every single time, and you're expecting marketable, like significant improvements in your memory and retention. I think that's pretty naive and asinine. Very, very foolish to think that you have done zero output because the results of something informs what your next action is. So that whole rudimentary and reductive way someone is trying to sell you their immersion all the time, your mass input methods, it works. How it's described, in my opinion, is trying to make it overly simplified. Like, in a way, this is what I mean by the difference between simplifying something and making it comprehensible. Comprehensibility doesn't necessarily imply that the concepts have to be simplified to a point that is generalized. I agree on a generalization that when someone says, oh, immerse as much as possible to learn, I agree. Now, if you're going to explain that to someone, it's not doing the same thing, expecting the same thing, and then somehow creating a different result. Usually, there is sufficiency. If you do something rapidly, repeatedly, over and over again, expecting the same, like expecting an improvement, that still will happen. It is sufficient, right? But it's not the results, in my opinion, personally, that the people selling the method is saying. Not intentional, like, I'm not saying they're intentionally hiding the secret or something like that. I feel like their explainer, the way they demonstrate, or however, it might be insufficient for some people and then sufficient for other people. Some people, like, if you're wondering, so why is this the case? Well, we use probability, right? When someone says immerse as much as possible, what is the success rate? It could be higher than 50%. I actually imagine it is probably higher than 50%. Just immerse. It's probably above 50%. It's not 100%, right? So that's kind of where you have to take the grain of salt, because now you have division. And where's that division coming from? It's the inappropriate, reductive ignorance that is spent on reducing output to a consequence of input. That is not true. I rarely think that you, like, how do you critically think and evaluate your performance without an output? Like, how do you know? So a lot of times people are like, oh, you just know, you just trust the process, right? You trust immersion and CI will naturally happen on its own. That's where I have a problem with the inappropriate application of the concept of CI, because it requires you know what the I is. I requires significant experience in output in order to know where your competence is before you can even engage in that activity. So whenever someone says like, oh yeah, we integrate the concept of CI, I'm like, okay, I get you integrate the concept of CI. Now, did you build a system well enough to know that it guarantees the person where their eye is? And that's where most of their focuses are. Like, most of the apps try to use a dynamic process to figure out where your eye is, and then when they narrow it down to where your eye is, then they can provide the material, serve you the material that is on your level. The person is not doing that anymore, right? The person themselves. And why is that a problem? Because this is the same as using your smartphone, ChatGPT, and that person saying, oh yeah, this app worked really well for me, and they go around to another person and say, use this tool, this is what the tool does. And when that person explains the thing, they don't explain how it works. They typically just explain what it does, not what it works, like how it works. So when someone goes around, it's like, oh yeah, I use this app. It uses CI in an immersion-based thing. This is what it does. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't explain how it works to me. Like, I don't understand. Like, you're saying it just serves you things that you want to see, or you... Okay, so you say you're gonna go watch an anime and you're gonna extract and sentence mine the sentence and then put them into this app that helps you guide your competence because they're keeping track. I see what you're explaining. You're explaining all the things that it does, but it doesn't tell me how it works. Naturally, I would use my experience to try to fill in the blanks and ask them, do you think sentence mining, like what is the function of sentence mining and the act of sentence mining helps with your retention? Like what is it that contributes to the retention of that? This is where output comes in. When someone says, oh yeah, you know, I make my sentence. Here are two scenarios that happen a lot, A and B. Someone who mines and auto-generates. So what they do is they focus on creating the highest efficiency on this roadmap, versus B, where this person selectively filters based on output, their sentence mine, and then they generate based on outputting into a card their personal things. And this delta often is not as significant, it's as slower. It's a slower process because output is involved in the process. Now, if you're gonna take bets, who A and B, which one is gonna burn out first? Probably retain less. But still reach the goal. So they still reach the goal. Right? B would naturally be less burned out. And they will probably end up being able to retain more. But they will still reach, and then obviously they'll reach the same goal. But the idea is that anytime I've ever asked someone, there's like 10 people who like they're part of the immersion only movement, right? The defining feature between one who is more successful, one of the distinctions, because it's a procedure, right? It's a protocol. Oftentimes when people sell a method, that is exactly what it is. They sell a method. A method is procedural. It is protocol. It's not understanding or comprehension of the theories and stuff behind it. You're not doing any analytical results of this. You're following a protocol. So oftentimes you have person A and person B. B ended up outputting in the process. A ended up solely relying on inputs. So because they solely rely on input, there's no adjustments. There's no adjustments, no corrections, right? And then you could even throw in low effort, because effort does also imply that it is efficient in time, right? And then someone who's outputting does actually engage in corrections, iterations, and whatnot, right? They'll both reach their goal. And that's kind of what I mean. And the people that are most successful, like in my opinion, James, you, the way you describe things, and the way Beth describes things, Drama describes things, you are outputting something in order to make corrections and iterations. Rarely are you making zero adjustments. Is what I mean. And it's very different because oftentimes when someone asks, oh, this method isn't working, and if the person says, are you sure you're doing the method correctly? And that would be someone who's not adjusting. and then someone will say, oh, hey, I've encountered that problem before, so I decided that I would do this instead of that because it worked to my benefit. That is someone who's outputting something. They're only, in my opinion, one of the major sources of understanding how to adjust is you need to output something. Otherwise, you can't make any adjustments. You rarely can. So would you say an advantage of Wanikani Bunpro would be its output requirements? I agree. That's what I would say. So I met this person, and we're just gonna call this person GYE, Guy. I'm just gonna call him Guy. And in order for me to explain, so I didn't explain whether it's an advantage or not. More so, is it complementary? So this person asked me a really standard question that occurs a lot. It's like, okay, I have a Bunpro subscription. I also have a Wanikani subscription, and I also signed up for classes, right? So then this person literally asked me, is there anything complementary about these things? They're not talking about redundancy, because they understand immediately. I jumped right into the complementary things, because an advantage would define that the output and input are complementary to each other, not redundant, right? Obviously, you could remake the Bunpro deck in Anki and then interact with Wanikani in the same way if you want it. So then you could say, okay, the input is minimally same, right? Ish. I don't actually think they have to be the same. But then when you talk about output, technically you can do the outputs in Anki if you want. You can also do it in Wanikani and Bunpro. However, when people use these things, when they use these things, they often are referring to the defaults, right? Their defaults. And if I were to give an advantage would be something like they don't want to think about it. They're not interested. If the person is not interested at the moment, they're not interested in why it works, then I would say the advantage is what you say. The advantage is that Bunpro and Wanikani, we're not going to talk about Anki. Anki can be customized, but in terms of Bunpro and Wanikani, the advantage is its output requirements. Your output, how you're checking for your output. The only way Wanikani can be, in my opinion, successful is if the mnemonics, if it leads to mnemonic consistency, which involves the building blocks of radicals, right? It's not consistent in the sentences. Like, you can read the sentences, but that's fine. Like, it in its mnemonics, and this is its read dominance. So, like, for example, and leading it all the way back to why I'm digressing here now is because I'm reading it as separate things. This is kana. The first routine I'm doing is this is kana, this is character. That is its output. Wanikani's output is this. It's its character, it's its kana. So I know this is a verb. I know this is transitive. Or no, sorry, intransitive, because it's oru. Reru. It's intransitive. I know this means slow. And I know the mnemonics that contribute to this. Do I need to command that? You don't really need to command that all the time. I'm doing it intentionally right now because I'm trying to I need it to support this stuff. So I think that's one of the great advantages. And if you don't, like, if people are not interested in this, like, what I mean is you don't have to be interested in it. It's like, no, you don't have to know the semantics of why this stuff works. My argument is, why not? As in, I'm trying to present a case to make this stuff interesting, you don't have to agree with me if this stuff is interesting. To me, I like using different tools because they're different tools, right? The idea is you have a bunch of people and they all are technically doing the same action to a lot of people. So the ones that think that this is all the same action are the ones that think, where's the input going to get me in the form of a goal? So all of these do lead to Japanese being learned. Like you will learn your, if this works, you'll get your N5 and your N4. If Duolingo works, you'll get your N5 and N4. If Wanikani works, you'll probably get your N5 and N4 in some capacity. My interest is, what are these arrows mean? Like, how do the arrows things? And I think that's cool because if you don't care, let's just say you don't care about this. Like, don't explain to me. Don't spend 3 hours explaining to me why it works. I just want it to work because I like using my smartphone without understanding how the smartphone works. I do that too. I have no idea how smartphones work. Like, I could barely code an app, but I do like the results. And to me, the one thing is when someone offers you something, you kind of want to have it explained to you, right? If you're curious. And it is through the analyses of these things that people who sell things is responsible for, at least in my opinion, in terms of making more money, right? It's a win-win. If a person's selling you an app, you kind of want to pay attention to these things. So my goal, oftentimes when I ever get a chance to interview someone, right? Like if I interview an expert who made this theory, right? Like my favorite thing is in science, when you go to like a conference and then you finally get a chance to meet the speaker, like the speaker who tells you their results from what they did, right? What they did. You finally get an opportunity to ask them how and why they did what they did to get the results, potential results, what they did, and then how the results dictate their conclusions and their basically how the output of their results then educate them in their new input, right? And that part can't be substituted. This is the experience output. So the results are explained in a way that is served as input, right? When you go to a seminar, you're listening to what has already happened as information. And the nice thing about meeting someone is you can ask how and why. And I think one of the advantages about how and why is if you understand your output. But if someone is inputting, for example, if someone is inputting solely for the sake of inputting, like 90% of their time, you're not going to ask that person for advice, right? You have to wait. You have to wait until the person starts outputting something, and then you ask them for their advice on what happened when they were inputting in the process of outputting, right? That's kind of in my opinion, that's the way people would gain usefulness from an expert. So what I have come to understand is, though, if you're inputting all the time, that doesn't stop this person from providing advice. And it's not bad or good. These are caring people. The way you can tell if they are input dominant in their thing is their advice would be procedural. So if you're ever wanting to understand like where their viewpoint is, and I use this, in my opinion, to talk to them in a way that it doesn't feel like I'm challenging whatever their notion is. So when someone tells me, oh yeah, you just use MAKU sentence mine from your favorite game, use Yomitan's plugin. I don't even know if Yomitan has a plugin, but like a game extractor thing, and then do this. Do it a couple of times and you'll understand what I mean. I'm like, I'll consider it, right? It's something I can do. I can follow the procedure and see what happens. And then that's how that person is explaining something to me. They're explaining the procedure. Whether it'll work or not, that's not the advice they're giving. The advice they're giving is they're giving me something to do. Whether it works or not requires that you output in order to understand if it works. And to me, I'm a bit of both. I like taking someone at their... if I have time and someone says, oh yeah, just go watch this movie, right? Go watch this movie. It's awesome. This tells me that the person inputted most of the time. And their output was generically combined to the word awesome. If I probe a little and ask them, so what do you mean by awesome? Was there any particular scenes or things that elicited this awesomeness? Then you can kind of test how often they've output something. The reason why I say it's an output requirement for this is because people are bad at expressing things. It's not, when I mean bad, it's not a negative thing. It's more, let's use a different word actually. I don't like bad. Under-practiced. Based on my projection of needing to understand them. So when I mean under-practice, I mean they don't explain things sufficiently for me to understand them. So instead, we can go and do the procedure of watching the movie, and then we can exchange, right? That's kind of the world we live in. It's far, and the reason, in my opinion, is yes, you can be very practiced at input. In fact, I would argue, if I had to flip the script on myself, I think most people are way better at input than I am. That's in my opinion. Like, they spend so much more time with their ability to input. I would say the majority of people are better at input than I am. Like, what I mean is they squeezed out. Now, how much better is hard to quantify, because remember that when you're talking about a skill, 80% of the skill is acquired with a disproportionately small amount of time, but it is the, you know, that smaller, relatively speaking, but this is what makes someone super good, like super good. And I actually think that because of their abilities that they spend, remember this requires a huge delta T. That's what I mean. They are probably better at input than I am. Like, vast majority of people, when they say, oh, let's immerse and learn fluent, they probably squeeze better than me. Yeah. To be honest, you don't think immersion or Bunpro would be meaningful output practice? That's fair. They both can help with your output long term, but to get good at output, you have to practice output. Okay, that sounded a little bit like a cyclic argument. And Bunpro only requires output of single words within pre-written sentences. To me, meaningful output would be forming your own full sentences. Okay. So, goal oriented, fair enough. I have no disagreements with that. In order to write full sentences, you have to write full sentences. That's the whole idea of output. Your qualifications of meaningfulness is restrictive. So I have no disagreements with that. If your goal-oriented state is to construct full sentences, and based on what I said, I agree with you. It requires the practice, the output of creating your own full sentences to create full sentences. And if that is the only thing that is meaningful output practice to you, then it is the only way that it can be meaningful. Right? Whether you choose to know what is meaningful about Bunpro or like immersion or something, that's up to you to ask, or maybe consider what is it that I just spent the last 3 hours explaining about the importance of that. But if that is not meaningful to you, then in my opinion, in a way, you just indirectly said that whatever I said, you don't really care about, which is fine. Like, what I mean is the whole idea of what I'm doing here, you specifically don't think it's meaningful because your metric is to form full sentences. That's accurate. It's very logical. Right? What you're projecting, though, if you are trying to convince me, I'm not saying you are. Again, I agree with everything you have said. If you're trying to output full sentences, Bunpro and most of immersion through input has no way of causing you to practice. Like, literally demand that you output full sentences, right? So that's unsaleable logic. It's great. I agree with you. Now, if you are sharing this, I'm not saying you are, but if you are sharing this with the intent of maybe integrating what I have said, I think you failed substantially. However, I don't think that's your intent. You're not trying to convince me that Bunpro is not meaningful. Like, you're not trying to convince me that it is not meaningful. You have convinced yourself that it's not meaningful, which I agree with, because the internal logic is, if you ask me, is Bunpro meaningful to construct full sentences? My answer is no, it is not. Right? That's it. If you're trying to tell me I'm wasting my time constructing full sentences with Bunpro, I'm telling you you're wasting your time thinking that's what I'm doing. Because my logic and your logic are concurrent, like they're coherent to each other. I didn't use Bunpro to construct full sentences. Right? That's the very part. Yeah, you're wanting to add to the distinction you've been drawing between the roles of input and input. Yes, I absolutely agree. So that's what I mean. I like that you did that, James, because I think this is the problem. To me, this is the miscommunication that I have with not you, with a lot of other people, where they say like, oh man, this is gonna help me like write sentences, right? No, it's not. It might aid in it, right? Like, it might kind of, if you push it really, really hard, maybe is sufficient. But we're talking about you're being so idealistic, right? That's what I mean by immersion. Immersion, the people who are advertising immersion, they're trying to make it argument is sufficient. You're trying to create sufficiency. I'm like, okay, but to what ends? Like, is it going to be 15 years of this? Like, are you going to somehow magically output these things? And usually the word sufficiency is thrown in, right? Like, you're saying, okay, just read a lot of disjointed vocabulary words over and over again. And there is a chance, right? There's a chance it'll be sufficient. And you're saying, okay, well, that's what scientific terms are. If something is possible and it is sufficient, then it's possible. Now, if you're asking someone who doesn't understand the process, the distinction between input and output, someone could be doing this and never realizing it, because sufficiency doesn't mean penetrance or occurrence or success. Sufficiency is crossing a threshold that makes it possible. So like, or you don't know what the penetrance is. Say you can argue that just learning a bunch of vocabulary will, if you find a case, or like 1 out of 100 case, that would be like the penetrance of it, where someone completely inputs all the time, even immersion, right? You add immersion to it. Reading disjoint, I'm making an exaggeration, so I'm not saying they're disjointed. I'm talking about like whichever method you want. Like, just pick an immersion, pick something that's heavily input focused, right? It could be flashcards with disjointed vocabulary. It could be, you could even add sentences to the cards. Like, okay, now you're reading all the sentences to the card. That's fine too. All of the above, you combine them, and you can make an argument that it is sufficient, right? That doesn't necessarily support whether its penetrance is correct on the idea of input. So the distinction here is exactly what you're making. Do you have to do that? Like, why, like, in my opinion, what is the motivation to reduce this to something so reductive? What are the odds that if you had input and output of various nature, you gain a synergistic effect, right? And by the way, I mean, nowadays, I would say the trend is to take a balanced approach, right? A balanced approach, largely because the balanced approach deals with delta T with respect to skill building. And what does that mean? If you're gonna rely on input, right? Input, know that when you get to a certain amount, right? This delta, right? This delta from input comes at a disproportionate amount of time. So if you take a balanced approach, what happens is, well, you can do some output in regards. You don't have to do you don't have to do it for that long. The reason is that you're still going to extract the short amount of delta in your T, right, in time, to extract most of the effects of output. So the idea is, yeah, you can choose your poison, right? Input is still sufficient. You're gonna say, you can argue input is still sufficient. However, you can spend a disproportionately small amount of time to extract a complementary or even a supplementary benefit without sacrificing too much of your time. So that's kind of like the idea of a sprinter who decide no weights versus a sprinter who adds weights, like weight training, for example, or like a person who diets without exercise. This is one of the or exercise without dieting. Time and time again, the vast majority of successful stories is that you do have a specialization that you can still focus, like you can go even deeper in the rabbit hole, but it's rarely not bolstered by the I don't know what you call it. Let's just call it like generalized advantage. Because the other way is when you specialize in something, you enter the diminished return. Diminished return in terms of time. So when you become specialized in something, the amount of time to improve your performance comes at a diminished return with your time, because it requires exponentially or like multiplicatively or additively more time to see an improvement at the like the higher upper limit, right? But not necessarily at the limit, in approaching the upper limit, right? Versus generalized advantage. So whenever someone says they immerse most of the time, they say immerse most of the time. So what else are they doing? And sometimes when I ask them how do they immerse, right? How do they immerse? They talk about output a lot. Far more than I feel they qualify as input. So, for example, when they say, oh yeah, you know, when I immerse, I talk to people and people give me feedback. And my first thought is, so is that input or output? Like, is that a combination of input or output? Like, what do you think this is? Like, oh yeah, I'm inputting only. I'm like, so when you say you talk to people, do you mean you just listen to them? Like, are you holding a conversation or something? Because if you're holding a conversation, like, where are you getting your feedback, basically? Like, my question is, where's the feedback, right? And I'm not here to redefine people's lexicon, but when they say they immerse and they talk, like they talk and get feedback, there's two possibilities that happen more often. One is they immerse by listening to conversation, and the feedback they're getting is how much they can comprehend, right? So even in this case, they're still listening, and the feedback is based on comprehension. Comprehension has a little bit of output involved. Maybe not as much as this person thinks. Like, maybe they're not focused on that. They're simply trying to confirm their input. But in order to confirm if they can comprehend the thing, it's still a little bit of output, right? It still construes as a bit of output. Thought to confirm your comprehension is a bit of output. Now, I would make an argument, yeah, this person is very input heavy. However, you think comprehending definitely involves output? Yeah, I agree. Like, I'm trying to be conservative about this because it is an uphill battle. Like, in my opinion, right now, it's difficult. Your mind has to output meaning to understand. I understand, James. Like, you're preaching to the choir, basically. I agree with you. You're like double downing on my opinion. I'm saying it's a little bit of output because it's hard for this group, this subgroup that I've encountered to consider comprehension as a form of output. But I think you and I are on the same page. Now, there are other people who immerse, right? They're immersion people, but they're talking about the act of outputs and inputs. So the vast majority of their time when they're immersing, they are outputting and inputting by what they mean by talking and getting feedback. So here's the crutch, or like the crux of my disagreement right now. When someone says feedback, right? When they say feedback, there is passive dominant feedback and active dominant feedback. Active requires participation both directions, and that is output heavier. Passive feedback is when someone explains something to the person, maybe from their lower outputs. So for example, and this is where I have been trying to help someone for a while, when someone constantly says, "What do you think?" And my first comment back is, like they would say, what do you think? I'm having problems with this. And then I would ask them, what do you think the problem is? Can you explain the problem to me first? Because the idea is I'm getting them to actively participate by outputting their problem to me, so then I can provide feedback in the way of active participation through output. So it's a combination of taking input from them, which is an output from them, right? I'm getting the input from their output, and then I'm going to output something in which then they can take it as input defined by their active participation. This is what, when someone asks me, can I get some feedback? This is the feedback they're talking about. It's incredibly input dominant. It's to the point where they minimally output, so they minimize output. So there's no incentive for them to explain something well to someone they're asking for information, because that other person is expected to provide all the input. That's what I feel when someone says immersion. I think so the people who are successful are doing this. The people who are less successful think this is what the successful people are saying. They're saying, sit there and be passive and then have everything explained to you so that it will somehow produce the necessary sufficiency to output as their goal. So if you sit there and have someone explain sentences to you over and over again, somehow it will lead to the sufficient output of those sentences. And I'm arguing that yes, it's probably sufficient, but to what end? Like, you only need one person to kind of argue in this day and age that is sufficient. So you need one influencer who has enough influence to say, oh, it worked for me, to create this, in my opinion, a mirage that of self-selected bias, confirmation bias on its sufficiency. So things that are sufficient are far more powerful when there is influence behind it. So when someone says, oh yeah, I just listened to anime all day and then read a bunch of manga and it worked for me, right? And this person commands a lot of influence and they do activities that enrich for input, strong input. Because in my humble assertion, that is what most people do really, really well. So when they do it really, really well, it can often seem like it's very feasible because it's easy, right? Like if someone tells you, oh man, you just need to continue doing exactly what you need to do, maybe with a little minor tweak, like just use my product. You're already doing the things that you're already doing, right? Like you're already watching anime, you're already watching manga. Take those things and just spend some money subscribing to my app and then doing the downstream effectors. And you are likely to improve in your learning. I actually agree. It probably improved their learning. I'm not saying that they don't work. I'm suggesting that do they understand where their gains are? And then to what end, right? To what end? Which is what I agree with you when you say forming your own sentences. Someone would get mad at me oftentimes. This is what they refer. Like my first year I used Duolingo. I use this a lot. I'd be using Duolingo and then someone comes in and is like, dude, Duolingo is not going to help you speak sentences. And then they would add more qualifiers. They're not gonna help you speak native sentences. And my first retort is, well, Duolingo doesn't teach you to speak, period. But like it doesn't have you construct speech. So we're talking specifically output. We're not talking about listening. We're talking about speech. So it doesn't do that. It barely does sentence construction. And all of the voices are synthetic. So yeah, it's not going to be native. And then they're going to say like, well, it's also an unnatural way to learn. It's like, I understand people don't, if you think about how learning sentences without someone telling you in context, that is qualifying as unnatural. So like they would get angrier, right? They would get angrier. It's like, but I'm telling you, you're wasting your time with Duolingo. Like, okay, can you explain to me how I'm wasting my time? Right? And they're like, what do you mean? Haven't you been listening to me? Duolingo doesn't help you speak, make sentences, or help you speak natively, and it teaches you an unnatural, abstract way of gamification that does something. And I'm like, yeah, I see that. I understand all the things you're saying. You're trying now use your observational skills to tell me how I'm wasting my time. Like, explain to me how someone could understand this person, like how I could understand you with all your metrics. Explain to me how I'm using Duolingo, right? Because the first assumption this person made was somehow when I'm using Duolingo, by default, I'm suggesting that Duolingo helps you speak. Minor at best, like 10%. Speak native, 0%. Like, if you can make an argument, maybe like 60% of it can capture maybe some of the pitch accent. I don't really know. Unnaturally, it's like it is unnatural to do these things. Learning in itself through abstraction is relatively unnatural. Like the way people qualify as what natural learning is. Natural learning is like having a kid trip over and experience something. That's what they qualify as natural. Like, I'm making a presumption. I could ask the person, can you qualify what you mean by natural? Is it that you have to go outside and touch grass? Fair enough. It's not that. You don't touch grass, or you don't go to Japan to use Duolingo. That's not how you, so it's unnatural. So these things, and that's what I mean by when you said, so would you say an advantage of Wanikani and Bunpro would be its output requirements? It is. It is one of the advantages. Now, it is certainly not an advantage to do what it's not doing. And that's what we recognize. That's what I want to recognize here. Like, I am only outputting and doing things that I have trained to do for Wanikani. So when I'm saying, like, if I'm doing this, I'm not doing this. That's not how I remember Wanikani. Like, I look at this character and I output something. That is the goal. I look at these kana that's attached to this character and I'm outputting something. If I'm looking at this, that's not Wanikani. Wanikani does not help me with this. The vast majority of its output requirements have nothing like this. Like, I'm not saying, oh, I look at this character. Okay, it's a verb meaning not arriving or occurring at the expect. Like, I'm not outputting that. Like, it didn't complete the cycle. Wanikani does not complete that cycle. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is I'm connecting output A with output B with output C. And then I'm designing a routine that takes C, allowing me to go back. That is what I'm doing. So my output is bidirectional. And what does that help me with? It helps me with memory. This is a retention. Retention of my method, mostly. And by proxy, the content itself is associated with these methods. So the more methods I engage in, the more likely I'll remember the content. And what are these methods? These methods are all output methods. And that's what I'm doing. So that's like the nutshell of the thing. I don't focus on the thing that I'm haphazardly doing in isolation. I focus on how to connect all of them so that doing any one of them would be associated with doing it with another thing in order to gather that possibility. Now, does this lead me to a complete sentence? The answer is no. I haven't gotten there yet. We haven't been making sentences, right? Hence why Hanzahiro, the next task in Hanzahiro after the character study is to create sentences. Is to look at vocabulary words and then create sentences for those vocabulary words, right? So now, again, have to be clear. Input and output are associated with each other in most things. The extent of particular properties of output and input, they can be significantly segregated for those things. And for output, it's experience dominated. For input, you could even argue it could be explicitly dominated at the moment. Oftentimes experience have this implicit nature. They're not exclusive of one another, just different. They're different extents, right? Output is often dealing with implicit understanding more so than input nowadays. Like right now, I'm more practiced in identifying input as explicit nature and then taking that input and creating output to create more implicit understanding. So like the act of comprehending requires that you take the explicit thing or the thing for what it is and then outputting it in order to then create an implicit understanding that then feeds back to input. So they are related to each other and they're rarely ever decoupled. So the cyclic argument here often is when someone I'll quote a video comment. It still exists, so you can search it. I can search it on my end on YouTube. It still exists. Someone said they spent 2 years input only, and then they went to Japan and output perfectly. I'm paraphrasing. They actually were even more detailed than that. And my first thought is, I'm glad it worked out. That's all I said. Like, I can't say anymore. The reason why this person told me this is because this is when I was still using Duolingo. That's their argument. Their argument is they input only through like typical arguments would be like, oh well, you could just like read a manga and you would be like 6 years ahead of Duolingo. The amount of time you spent with Duolingo would get you nothing close to like 1 hour of manga reading each day. And even then, you can probably learn more vocabulary words in the matter of 2 weeks compared to like a year in Duolingo. I'm like, I get that. Probably. Maybe. I haven't tested it. But I imagine if you read 2 hours of manga each day as opposed to like 6 hours of Duolingo, then the idea is Duolingo will move at a slower pace because its vocabulary introduction is a lot slower, right? Like by metric. And this person then goes on to boast about how they spent 2 years with input only, and then the moment they got to Japan, they had no problems outputting. That's the type of person I'm talking to right now. So I get on their level. I'm like, that sounds amazing. And then the person's like, well then, Duolingo sucks. And I'm like, okay, Duolingo sucks. I mean, what else am I gonna say? Every single metric that they use is not what I saw Duolingo has any value in. Like Duolingo really doesn't have any value for most of these things that this person values. So I got nothing. And that person never went on to ask me, then why are you using Duolingo? Someone else answered for me though, which I'm okay with, but I'm very hesitant because I don't particularly like people who white knight. Like out of argument, but this person was very like they were very polite about it, and but they still use like triviality. So they're like, dude, bro, just leave the guy alone. All he wants to know is what Duolingo does. Like, he's there to understand what Duolingo does, not what it is that you value about it. And then if Duolingo feels that, but the person spoke like a bit downplaying, like the in order to seem empathetic and be in a discussion, you have to meet the sensitivity of the person. So when someone says like, bro, it's not that deep, or bro, like, that is when, yeah, and then they start talking, and then they talk like I'm not there. So the two of them would like go, the other person went continue and say, dude, I'm just trying to tell this idiot that they're wasting time with Duolingo. And then, you know, then creates a third wheel problem, which demonstrates that they were only talking at me, not with me. So they spent their whole time telling me something without knowing who they're talking to. This is like the dynamics, in my opinion, when it comes to language learning freely, not language learning alone. So like, I'm no longer, if you're like, hear me out. Do I consider streaming while studying self-study? It can be considered self-study when the person who's making content is zeroly influenced by another person. I'm not self-studying. Like, that's my qualifications. I'm not self-studying. I'm studying by taking into consideration most people's comments. So rarely am I self-studying. I'm reading vocabulary, right? When we were doing vocabulary and grammar things, I'm not reading in a void. I'm trying to find the connections between my experience sharing my language learning journey with what's going on literally. So, you know what's the craziest part? The moment I stopped using Duolingo, all of those stories that I had, they went away. Like, they're just gone. Like, there's no... And I sort of anticipated that it would occur if I reset the number. So one of the biggest social experiments that I have ongoing, and people occasionally ask after a while if they return, is why do I have numbers adjusted to quite literally everything that I've done? That number signifies a social experiment that I had been doing about the portrayal of expertise. So while it went away with Bunpro, it is still more occurrent when that number is lower. So the lower the number, the more likely you'll get unsolicited advice. It is disproportionate. It can be segregated with the contentiousness of the product. So Duolingo has more exposure, it has more divisiveness, and inherently negative when the number is low. When the number got higher into the 300 range, I only did it for a year or so, 300 range, the amount of information and the talking involved more and more output between people. So it came with, oh, I use Duolingo, then I use Renshu, and then now I'm incorporating some of Anki, and then I have this particular manga that I'm working on translating. That's when it increased. But when the number goes back to 1, then we get more questions that deal with projection, right? Like, hey, you know, oh, in case you didn't know, like, I know you're just starting out with Bunpro, but here are some hot tips for you. Make sure you don't fall into the trap of thinking so-and-so. And I'm like, I understand. Like, oh, okay, I just thought I'd let you know because all these problems may occur. And so then I get a feeling of what type of advice that people give. And generally, number one advice is fear. You can use words like bad, trap. So now this is my social experiment for learning things. How do I tell how beginners get advice online? So like what is the nature of advice? Usually it deals with fear. And that's where I'm getting all these anecdotes. The reason why when I talk to someone and I ask them like, what's the nature of your problem? Like, have you tried describing it to someone? Give me a shot. Tell me about it, and I'll ask questions accordingly. So most of these things have been great social experiments, and hopefully in the future we can make that a little bit more meaningful. Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think so long story short, I don't think Bunpro gives you meaningful output practice in completing full sentences, because it just doesn't. Like, I would venture to guess that those who think so would have to greatly temper their expectations in order to be satisfactory with Bunpro. Like when you buy Bunpro, right, and they're expecting that you're suddenly going to construct full sentences from the understanding of grammar, like transition well into it, understanding grammar, and then a bunch of vocabulary that they insist, and then somehow it just marries together and it would come out as an output product. That is probably going to be a very sobering activity. For myself, I've already described my loop, right? I already drawn it out. You know, you have Japanese, so I can wield Wanikani and wield Bunpro's vocabulary, right? And then their grammar. And what happens is these are the only things I can output. I can pick out the words and then pick out the grammar structure, the grammar rules, which is what I do when I look at grammar rules. I look at the relationship, confer it with a translation of it. So that's confirming. So it's two-way confirmation. Then I look at the target word, which is in English, right? And in English, then I trigger Wanikani. So I have to output the character. So I have to imagine this in my head. That is a new step. The new step in Bunpro is to think, can I write this character in isolation? Not in the sentence, in isolation. Then I produce this word. So this is Wanikani's output. As well as now I have to leverage how it matches up. So when I produce this Wanikani output, I have to leverage how well I understand describing this target word. And then I take this target word and relate it to the rest of the sentence. All of this happens in one cycle. That is the output that you get for me. So my output is going through, and this relation, what is this relation? It's Duolingo. This part is Duolingo. The idea is the routine. I'm not saying Duolingo taught me this routine. The consequences of using Duolingo enabled me to use this routine. So that is what I know how to do. That is what you practice output. So in the future, when someone says, oh yeah, you know, what is that word? What is that word that you use when you're kind of talking about fruits, but you're also talking about eating a fruit, like having eaten, you know, ate a fruit. And the recall from Bunpro, Wanikani, and Duolingo is that I can name a bunch of fruits, right? Wield a bunch of grammar and put it into the context of this, and it will be slow, but then doing this action and practicing this action can possibly create full sentences. Now, there's something odd and off about this, because this is piecing it together. When you're listening to a sentence full, you have to be able to break it down into the pieces to confirm that you did this correctly, right? And through this act of full sentences, like construction, it still won't get you to native sentences without the act of doing it. So this in itself isn't necessarily native sentences. It won't guarantee the workflow to create and generate a native sentence. It tells you how to piece together vocabulary, a context in which your intent to influence your grammar structure. That's what Bunpro does. So that in itself is what I would say I would describe what Bunpro does. It doesn't help you generate full natural sounding sentences. You would have to go through a very long process of creating sentences with like other things, which we'll get to that at some point. Alternatively, you can try to break something down and then reconstruct it back up, which would take a substantial amount of time as well, which is kind of like how science does it, right? Biology. You take a phenomenon that is too complicated to understand in its entirety, you break it down into some parts, see how they interact with each other, right? And then you reassemble it through a creation process. And then with that creation process, you have to iterate. Right? You iterate over and over again until it reflects the predictability. It creates predictability and reflection. And through this act, you get the benefits of output. The output in which you can create the operation. And that's how I go about it. So this is how I go about it. If you're wondering why this method, because I don't learn like the way internet peoples learn right now. Actually, I'm kind of learning a lot about how people learn online. Like, how do people learn online? Like, how do people self-study? I've learned quite a lot lately about what people consider as self-study. All of this that we're talking about here is a reflection of what I have learned about other people, like online. It is certainly not my way, like not what I have discovered that works for me. Now, in order to make it my own, is that I take my experience, I extract what I can do with Bunpro, right? And then I integrate my experience to create meaningful outputs. So I told most people who asked me for advice, take whatever I'm doing with a grain of salt. At each project and each tentative take, I try to explain where my experience comes from. Because it's not going that this is a game changer, right? For me, right? The older I get, the more the experience is going to be different. I'm someone who applies my experience. So when someone says like, Bunpro doesn't help you create full sentences, I have to use my logic. I have to use my logic to rationalize that is true. Like what you say is true. Will Bunpro help me create new sentences? The answer is yes, it will. It will very likely. But it's not because it's ascribed to Bunpro alone. It's because I will use my experience to integrate something that goes beyond Bunpro. It's beyond Bunpro. it includes Bunpro. So when you have to argue against me, does it have meaningful output? Bunpro alone? Not really. Me using Bunpro, the answer is absolutely yes. And that's where I have a problem when people sell products. If they are selling products, you have to also understand the person really, really significantly, sufficiently, in order to understand what are the conditions of your product. Right? What's your eye at? Because the people you are sampling might lack a lot of these things. So I love when people talk about themselves and their products, like the relationship of them, what they do, how they use it. So you observe that person's interaction with their own product. So I'm often very, very grateful that when someone suggests something to me, like when someone says, hey, you should use Satori Reader, or it worked for me, and they spend more and more time explaining to me their relationship with Satori Reader, like how are they using it, in what way, that's when I become invested, because I have more to gain than simply looking at the product. If you look at the product itself, it's very rudimentary. Like what I mean is, the fundamentals are the fundamentals. Bunpro isn't gonna adapt to me. Like I know some people say, well, SRS adapts to you. Not really. Not to the extent that maybe even ChatGPT can adapt to you. Sort of. That's where feedback is, right? Self-study requires that the feedback be dynamic, because most people don't do that. They don't actively participate in outputs. They try to avoid output because it's laborious and it's exhausting, and it comes with diminished return, or so they think it comes with diminished return. So for myself, to make a counter argument to you, that's why I was asking, are you asking if you're trying to convince me that Bunpro doesn't have any meaningful output for me to generate full sentences? I would disagree with you, but that's assuming that I contribute no experience to using Bunpro. Like, that means that me being able to generate sentences in English has no interactions with Bunpro not generating full sentences. So that would be a great argument. If I were to start Bunpro without leveraging any understanding of how the relationship between sentences, words, and stuff, and other languages together, then yes, Bunpro will most definitely not produce any meaningful output. And remember, the other part of me is that I'm doing something else that Bunpro informs, like something else that does provide sentences or encourage me to create sentences while I'm listening to them, right? Like speaking like in the evening, what I would do is I would try to extract meaningful expressions that are used commonly in streaming, and then I would use them and create them and tweak them to my desire using Bunpro and Wanikani's vocabulary, and then piecing them together to design my own like outtakes, outros, and intros. That is creating a sentence. So in a way, you could say it's part of the process. In another way, if it's goal-oriented and the metrics does not include what the product does, I can reasonably agree with most people, right? And that's why it's very interesting to hear and gauge how other people process the relationship between output and input, because this would be an output moment. I'm outputting why I believe that I can tell people that if they're not thinking about making sentences, creating sentences, stringing together sentences and outputting that in their free time while using Bunpro, then yes, Bunpro will not have any meaningful outputs whatsoever, since you're not creating full sentences in the process, right? Along the process. But I'm not doing that. I actually do create sentences while I'm learning things. In fact, what I typically do is I do hybrid language while I'm doing that. It's my compromise. So whenever I'm like brainstorming stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, so I kind of know how to say this, but all right, hybrid language. But now I need like something to say about this. It's like, okay, so now I need to figure out how I can say this in Japanese. That's what I do on a daily basis. I hear someone say, oh yeah, this phrase is fantastic. But then I usually say this, but I have no idea how to say this. So how would I connect this phrase? Let's go look in Japanese. Do I have anything from Bunpro or Wanikani that helps me bridge this? And then I go test it. So in a way, Bunpro is part of the process of creating full sentences. Yep. Just to make like a slight alteration. Again, we've already clarified that that's not what you were doing. Your intent was to draw the distinction between input and output. Yeah, mine is it requires an output of my own experience in order to make Bunpro be part of a process that involves making full sentences. But the Bunpro itself does not create the output of full sentences. Okay, anyways. Now we're gonna breeze through this in an expedited way to save a little bit of time. So, 遅れる sandal, self-explanatory. Which one is this? Is this Suna? Okay. Okay. Suna. So this is a standalone one for San. Kikoru. Oh no, okoru, not kikoru. Okoru. For occur. So ki, right? Ki, and then rise, or rising in happenstance, and then it's the koru that defines it. このように、このように、いや、このように。This yo. We're gonna have to come back to that. Most kana phrases are outside of the realm of my kanji. Oh, wait. Here's a kanji thing though. Oh, resemble. I see. That makes sense. In this manner. Kono yo ni. Resemblance. Or in that manner. You're bored on a plane. Do I have ideas? Study for your exams. Soup. Makes sense. Western. Yofuku. Yofuku. That's yo for Western, and then clothing. Yofuku. I mean, you're bored. What's less than boring? Studying for the exams that you only have like 2 weeks to study for, or maybe even less by the time you land, because you might take a day or two to recuperate or something like that. Nothing to lose, you suppose. Yeah. Yep. And hear me out, if you're studying and you get tired, you can sleep or rest, because that's what you're going to be doing when you land, right? In fact, I might even encourage you to do just that. Study, sleep, right? You gotta get cracking. Vacation time is over, right? Consider it an early test. You're planning to sleep in the daytime, actually. Fair enough. Sleep whenever you want to sleep. Sleep, study, sleep, study. What is this? Aisha. So, Haisha. And this is related to, what is it? Shika? How they were using shika? Or shika. No, shika. It might be shika. And so we got the one that I'm more used to. Aisha. Hiruyasumi. Hiruyasumi is fine. Honnyaku. Ooh. Hold up. What does homework? It's definitely translation. Hon. Help with hon. I don't think. Oh, I do. Oh, I haven't gotten it yet. Unfamiliar character. Lip? Interesting. Lip. Lip translation. I might have to write something for this. Possibly. I'll think about it. Law? Law, so ritsu. What is the other one? Horitsu? Horitsu. Way of the law. Or way of doing something. Method. Method law. Horitsu. 11 visits done though, 4 ruled out, 4 you like, 3 you like somewhat. Well, that's fantastic. I think 4 is more than sufficient. Hopefully. What's that? Niwa? Niwa is fine. Katsu. Katsu. Seki? Seki. Oh. That's Atama. Atama. Okay. Seki. Konya. 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 So. Soldan. Soldan is like a verse. And salt. Okay. Tariru be sufficient. Or to be worthy, etc. To fill a requirement. Maitsuki. Oh yeah, this is special. Maitsuki. It's like Maitoshi. We got Jisen, Jishin, Shin. Suits. Oh yeah, this one is special. Yeah. Sucho. Business trip. Long excursion. Long exiting. Excursion. Alright, let's go back really quickly. We got a long Wanikani day. Long Wanikani. I think we're just gonna skip the review today, the grammar reviews, and stick to our lessons. Hanzahiro, we're gonna try to stick in Hanzahiro, do the characters, and then push the characters, so then we can do the Wanikani. I enjoyed like seizing the opportunity to digress, so we're gonna liberate that time. So okureru, a verb meaning not arriving or occurring at the expected or scheduled time, right? Okureru. It's kind of special because oku is not the same as oso. I think this is probably, we're gonna need something. I haven't decided if I want to add the radicals into the descriptor yet. It does make it a little bit unwieldy, but I almost feel... Alright, we're gonna close this and see if we can keep this intact. And then we're gonna commit to using radicals as well in our notes. That's my thought right now. A non-Japanese word for a type of footwear that leaves the front of the foot exposed, providing ventilation and comfort. Nandaru. Front isn't interesting, just the front. How about... He's okay. Small loose particles of rock and mineral materials found on beaches and in deserts. A verb that describes an event happening or incidents occurring, often used to talk about unexpected situations, right? I'll quote it. Okay. I think that might be okay. This one is not so okay. Unless I imagine... Unless if I imagine the kanji. Oh, and it's that ko. An expression which indicates doing something following a specific method, approach, or manner that's being described close to the speaker. I don't think I have this character. I do not. The call. Maybe it's a separate thing. Oh, I do have yo though. Similar to... I don't have call. Guess it's that rare, huh? Well, we're gonna come back to this one. So... D for days until exam. How would you suggest studying for Saturday? 23 days. Or stats, not Saturday. Stats, CS, 16 days plus 18 days. Math, 17 days plus 19 days. And art, coursework submissions. As in what methods and time distribution? You don't want to waste a few days thinking about how to start. Can't really answer that question. Other than your methods would have to even... I would probably suggest... And I'm assuming all those days are not staggered, right? They're all the same days. Like the same 23 days is the same 16 plus 18 days, which is the same 17.9. Like, yeah, 23 days. So this represents 23 days, right, for stat. I'm guessing that's statistics. I'm not sure what SAT stands for. But let's just say statistics. Plus multiple exams, yeah. And then, yeah, so you're still gonna go through the 20 days. Oh, SATs. Oh, for SATs. Oh, so now they're not subjects. Okay. Now CS and math. Well, I can tell you something about this thing. Don't linear it. So I can tell you some safe stuff, maybe. Not linear. Don't do like, all right, I'm done with SATs. Now you start CS. It's like, oh, I'm done CS. Then start math. So you're gonna have to evenly distribute them, right? So the classical way, typically when you have multiple, so you have like arts, there's still arts. So you have 4 things, right? And you have 23 days here. You have 24 days. 26 days. Okay, so 24, 26. And then you have 16. So 16 days. Since they all overlap, right? If you were to distribute a time frame, you can evenly distribute your coursework. So here's your work, whichever one it is. Set it to the minimal or maximum or whatever. Set this. So you need 16, whatever this amount is. So this would mean the completion point, right? Typically you would want to have milestones in which you can submit the product as is. So oftentimes the last 2 would be like, oh, if I don't get to these last 2, I can submit as is. So I don't know what that is, because it's like still days until exam from now, so 16 days from now. Oh, the plus is like still days until exams from now. So, okay. Alright. So you decide to use 2 different notations. So we're just gonna say 18 for CS and 19 for math. So we'll just use the max. So regardless, you have to take your smallest amount of units, separate them so that the last 2 divisions, so you're distributing it, so the last 2 or 1 division, I don't know how close you want to cut it. This is procedural, so that's kind of the idea behind this is if you don't make it to the last part, you can still submit it as is. So that gives you a breathing room. So you need to break it up into as many parts as possible. Distribute it with the deadline in mind and have a buffer of 1 extra session. The reason why you need to split this up is it's probably going to be split up in 4 gaps or something, is because then you would have to do the same for every single one of these. Because in one of the typical ways to offset burnout is to stagger your one of the ways is to stagger your subject matter. Now, this is making the big assumption that you don't create a tier list based on how much you hate it. If you do have a tier list, then typically you would probably want to rearrange the thing you hate most to do with the thing you hate until the thing you hate least. You could burn out. Is it worth it though? I mean, I don't, this is, you don't know. Like, stop talking like you do know that you could burn out. We're talking about hypotheticals here. So if you say you could burn out, you're going to burn out then. Like, if that's where we're starting, then no, you're screwed. Like, if you're asking, is it worth trying to study, and you're saying I could burn out, then it's not worth until you actually think it's worth. So I'm not here to convince you if it's worth. If you don't think it's worth, it's not worth. You're never going to succeed. That's like the most direct way. So we're gonna assume it's worth it. With or without burnout, because you don't know. The whole point is that you're trying to avoid burnout, even if it's burning out or not, right? So the idea is that in order to avoid or mitigate burnout, which is not a state in itself, so it's not like you do one thing and suddenly you're between not burnout and burnout. It's not that. We're talking about how much you're going to burn, like how hard can you work, not, oh, okay, if I do one more thing, I'm officially burnt out. That's not what this is, right? This is time. So the idea is, number one, something, a suggestion. Again, I don't know what the details are. Suggestion, you have to do all subjects each day. Number two suggestion, the amount of time is ascribed to the reasonable, we'll just say the average amount of time that you have decided of the earliest subject deadline. So according to your days, it's art. So I can't tell you how long these things are going to take and how long you're going to do these things. But the thing is, if you need to work on art for, say, 30 minutes a day on average, in order to meet your goals with one extra day left over, because you don't know if something bad's going to happen or not. So if you can meet your goals a day early, all of your subjects are going to have that amount of time, at least that amount of time. So then you'll be spending, like, say, 30 minutes on art, 30 minutes on SATs, 30 minutes on CS, 30 minutes on math. Now you're wondering, but what if SATs, CS, and math takes more time? That's the next step. That's step 3. Step 3, you have to check if it fulfills your time requirements for all the other ones. Starting with CS is next, and then math, then SATs. And we're not getting any more complicated than that, because the more complicated it becomes, the more you're gonna hit the ground and you're gonna start thinking about it. And whether you meet all of your goals is not the goal, because if you try to keep thinking that you're gonna try to predict all of the future and then make your estimates accurate, that's assuming you had enough time to begin with, which you don't. So I'm already presuming that the safe bet is that you're not going to meet your goals for any of them. So if you're gonna make a comment, which you probably just did, everything every day sounds interesting. Also, you don't believe you can make estimates comfortably for how long anything will take. You can't. That's the whole point. In this way, you're trying to pick a plan, pick a average case, and you're basically trying to distribute the things so you don't get into burnouts, which that's what I mean by not linear. Because what you typically do, in my opinion, when you do something is you have CS, math, right? Math, SATs, art. What happens is then you organize it based on hate scale, what you dread most, and you would pick the easiest first, the thing that you can approach most. So easiest to hardest. And then what happens is you start with the easiest and don't track your time. So you're like, you vibe your time, your delta T, and then you might make it down to one of your hardest tasks. But typically what happens is you stop somewhere along the way, and then eventually when this vibe gets you maybe completion of the first task, then you run out of time on everything else. That's my impression. This is my impression. And then, so then these things get sacrificed for the thing. And what happens here is this creates a behavior where you always focus on the easiest and most approachable thing, which gives you the least reward. It does. It gives you the least reward. It's instant most of the time. And it's cheap. And then most of the harder ones will hit you harder. They'll hit you like a dump truck. So, in order to address these things that I've come to accept about you, you have to arrange it hard to the easiest, determine the time it takes by spreading these things, and distributing to all of them so you know that you're going to have work done for all of these. Because you have more to gain in 30 to an hour of all of them than focusing on what you would typically do, which is to take the easiest task, vibe the easiest task, and see if you have enough vibes from the less cheap instant reward to do the rest. That's probably the thing in a nutshell. So, if you want a reason to take this with a grain of salt, this is how I approach most things too. Like, I take the hardest task, I use the average time to complete the hardest task so that I'm going downhill, not uphill. This is for the daily consistency. You take the hardest task and go downhill. And to create completion across the board, this is for your goal. Some time invested into multiple things give you greater overall reward typically and performance than taking one task, especially if it's the easiest task in the long run. This gives you the ability to, when you say, I don't know how long anything takes, you can have an idea-ish about 4 different things than one thing. Because if you put all your eggs in one basket and you pick the easiest thing, then you can probably vibe it and estimate it pretty well. And then you never, you won't get better at anything else. Meanwhile, the goal is to do everything else. You have to do everything else. The natural thing would be for me to, if I were to suggest, 1, find the hardest task, find out what is you have to spread, right? Spread your time across all the days plus 1, right? All the days plus 1, then apply it to all of your tasks, going from hardest to easiest. And there's no skipsies, right? Because you can't skip. This means that you're not going to skip either. The reason why you're not going to skip is because you know the next task is going to be an easier task. Or you have told yourself it's going to be an easier task. And we're talking about feeling here, like your willingness to do something. You have no excuse anymore. To remove the excuse is that if you start with the hardest task, the next one's going to be easier. Then easier, then easier. If you jump to the easiest, fair enough. But generally speaking, you kind of want to keep going easier, easier, and easier. Because the first thing you have to do is do all of them. Because you're planning around all of them. So, all, hardest, spread, hardest to easiest, and then go for it. There's no way you're going to be able to anticipate how long things are taking. on all of them because it's way too complicated. Anyways, that's a suggestion, but a suggestion in explaining things would mean that you're gonna take some time to think about it. So good luck with that. このように it's gonna require some work here. So each day, figure out what's the hardest task that day, get something done, move to the next hardest, get to the next easiest. Get minimum something done for each exam every day. Yeah. To the next easiest, not the next hardest. Yeah, I think of it in reverse. I think that's what you meant, but I think the habit, that's an old habit or a conditioned habit. When anyone says like you start with something, you start with the hardest, and then immediately the habit is okay, the next thing is the next hardest, but it's the next easiest. Yeah, I think I know how that feels. You could call it like a Freudian slip or something like that. I think for the most part, that's what would be the natural arrangement. People would start with the easiest and then they go on to the next hardest so they can work themselves up. I get you can do that. It'll still work. The reason why I suggest hardest to easiest is from experience. Like what I mean is the amount of times we've talked, it's usually the hardest that causes you to stop everything. So you start with the hardest. Other people do work up. Like for example, you can do like a bell curve. You can start with something easier. And then when you get warmed up, your hardest is in your midday. And then the easiest is at your end day. This is a different strategy. You warm up. I do this for the most part. I warm up to something. So Wanikani, Bunpro, and then Hanzahiro. That's why I ordered the things this way. The consistency kanji deck and slowly deteriorating consistency in word reads. Yes, exactly. So you went with you went with meaning first. Typically meaning, and then English meaning. That's the easiest task. And then immediately it spikes to like the hardest task. Right? Oftentimes when you run out of time, you have to spike to the hardest task, which is the reads. But sometimes if you have enough time, when the meaning task is like really easy, you can still do like vocabulary in English. And then it super spikes again, so it always ends. You don't accomplish the spike in difficulty. So I did suggest starting with this like either here before you do your vocab or at the beginning, but neither of those took hold. Right. In a way, that's kind of like taking your output, right? What you have described to me, I'm taking what you have described to me as face value, and then you're working against it. Would flashcards be advised against? I mean, it's up to you. Like, I don't actually know what you're going to do. The idea is the details, right? The devil's in the details, obviously. So I'm not going to say anything about details because I don't know what type of things you need to learn. When it comes to the method, it is up to you to know what is appropriate. So methods are dealing with appropriateness. And since I don't know CS art, I know some things, but I don't know the nature of what they teach, like what their metric. You have to determine the appropriateness of the method. So I can't tell you if flashcards are advised against or not. I was specifically talking about reflecting on your behavior, like your behavior, your habits that you are already established, and working with the understanding of your habits. It could be flashcards. I don't think the methodology is gonna necessarily dramatically affect your timing of things. You gotta do something. Okay, soup. Soup. A liquid-based dish made by simmering ingredients, often including vegetables, meats, and spices. Sure. Yofuku refers to garment or attire, especially Western style, right? That's the West clothing. A medical professional who specializes in oral care and take care of teeth. And the care of teeth. Right? Aisha. A designated period during the day when people take a break to take a break to eat lunch. Yeah, hiruyasumi. I wonder, oh man, I wonder if this is gonna end up overlapping with hiru, like, or just saying a meal and then attaching, inferring it's a break. The process of converting text or speech from one language to another. So, honyaku. So, hon is new, or I haven't gotten this kanji yet. Although, it comes with fun. Is it fun? Not fun. Fun. It's fun for turnover. Okay. And then I get the hun. I see where the hun comes. You're sort of worried you'll spend 30 hours on one painting for your art and quantity is an issue? Well, that's why I guess you still haven't heard what I said. You take the hardest, right? You take the hardest. The next step is spread. Plus 1 buffer day. And you're gonna argue, well, I can't estimate. But then the next step is to define how you're gonna do all the others. From hardest to easiest. So either you decided to ignore what I said, or if you're worried, then you should do something about it. But yes, I would worry about spending 30 hours on one painting for your art because, again, not linear. I already anticipated that you were gonna... I understand what your concerns are because that's what this is for. The idea is that your concerns are that you have to do all of these categorizations. And when you say you're sort of worried about spending 30 hours on one painting, if you're suggesting that you're going to do that, then you need to figure out the spread. It's part of spread. Because you have to spread plus 1 day. So if you have 16 days in art, and you're saying 30 hours, well, 30 hours, let's say you're 30 hours and you have, I don't know, 6 paintings, because I don't know your, again, all the specifics. 6 paintings. Well, 6 paintings times 30 hours is 180 hours. You have 16 days, right? You can try to split that up if you want on the worst case scenario. If you're worried about the worst case scenario, then adjust the worst case scenario and then see how feasible it is. If it isn't, then you have your answer, right? Regardless, it has to, each one of your days have to account for all the others, which will make it so that you can't spend 30 hours. There's no 30 hours in one day, but even then you can probably make it work, because if you needed 6 things and you do right in the beginning all your paintings, it could be 180 hours, who knows. The idea is you're probably going to end up getting burnt out and then you don't do the rest. So that's why you had to organize everything and expect to do everything, and it has to be spread across the days with +1 buffer. So if you intended to spend 5 hours on that thing, then it's 5 hours. Now, if you are arguing, well, what if you then have 16 days and then you had these days and then you decided, oh, I got stuck on 30 hours, you know, like, so you did 8 hours here, 8 hours here, 8 hours here, 8 hours here, all right? So then you have 30 hours. So you only got 1 painting done. Does that mean that you spread everything out plus 1 day, right? Even if you added an extra day, this means you failed. You went out to fail, because you would have to determine how many paintings you have. If you have to do 6 paintings, you only have 1 day per painting. So then when you say you have 30 hours, you're going to hold yourself accountable. If you do in fact plan to do 8 hours a day, these are figurative numbers. We could say, like, say 2 hours a day, right? And so on and so forth. And then you ended up doing 18 hours or something, right? Then it's your fault. And that's healthy. You talked about advice and plans, so you don't have to think about it in plans. Well, if you're planning something, we talked about this, right, many times. When you plan something, plan to do it. It's non-negotiable. The reason why it's not negotiable for you is because you have no accountability. No one is telling you that you have to do this. Only you. So if you're saying you're worried about spending 30 hours on one painting and you already plan to not do that, then it's your fault and no one else's, which is excellent, right? Yeah, new season of Boys did just start, James, the first episode. I'm looking forward to watching it. Right now I'm looking excited for Boys and Invincible. Invincible is on its last season, I think, and it's on episode like 5. And then I'm also watching season 2 of Daredevil. They're all kind of very related, if you know what I mean. Like they're like their themes and motifs and stuff are very related to each other. So yeah, episode 1 was, I think, the 8th. So it was, I think it's today. Today is or local time. Local time is the 8th. Today's episode 1. Oh, you got 2? Oh, we get 2 episodes? Nice. I can't wait to watch it. This is the last season of Boys too. Okay. Yeah, this is the last season of Boys too, the series finale. And this is also the, I believe this is also the series finale for Invincible as well, which is a long time coming. However, it's not necessarily the end for like the Boys universe, but it's also not the end for the, obviously, the Invincible's universe, but as well as Daredevil is on their season 2. Last season. You watched the whole show with your bud and you're looking forward to it? Nice. I'm looking forward to talking about it with you at some point. I also watched Gen V, right? Gen V was the last season's gonna feature Gen V characters. How many seasons did they have? 3 seasons? Gen V concluded. Right before season 3 was Into the Boys, so Gen V will have characters in it. Anyways, yeah, excited. That's kind of what I'm watching at the moment. Those are the 3 like Western productions that I'm watching at the moment. There might be one other. Can't seem to remember if there's one other or not. Oh, that would be it. That's kind of neat that you're watching with someone else. Okay. MAKU. You've been rewatching One Punch Man season 1? It is a great season. Season 1 is a great season. That show really hit its high. It's so good, but wish the other seasons were better. Yeah. Procall mentioned about season 3 and it recently concluded. I watch anime when their season concluded, so like 2 or maybe like 2 months back I watched season 3. Yikes. I was thinking to myself how, like, if the internet was overreacting. Still slightly, but not that much. I think it's quite warranted for season 3. That was a rough one, considering that season 3 was around was on solo leveling as well, which solo leveling and One Punch Man has a lot of like motifs and compositional similarities, but solo leveling knocked it out of the park. And One Punch did not, to say the least. Hopefully, maybe season 4 will turn it around or whatnot. You know, try to be optimistic about it. And solo leveling still has more seasons, but these two are the power trip, the power fantasy ones, and the execution is like night and day at the moment. Not to sound too generalizing, but those two tend to fit next to like Jujutsu Kaisen, which is also happening on and off, but not in the same period at the moment. Yeah. Yesterday I watched the final movie, not final movie, but the movie final. I guess in Japanese, if I were to translate it from English, it's more like movie finales. Movie finale series. Kind of like what they're doing with Demon Slayer, right? Demon Slayer, I watched the Haikyuu next, like they're still there, it's a movie trilogy, right? These are called finale series, so trilogy of movies. And I watched the 2024 one. The next one is in 2027, but it's the last 3 matches in the volleyball series Haikyuu. It took a really long time before they just decided to like conclude the things. Demon Slayer also had their first movie. I think it was 2025. It was last year. And they're called the movie finales, right? They call them final movies. I don't, but that's probably because of translation between Japanese and English. But they're like the finale trilogies, not like the final movie. It's kind of a nitpick on how it's translated, because there's a lot of places that would say, oh, this is the final movie, and then some people watch it, it's like, wait a minute, the series hasn't concluded. It's like, yeah, there are two more movies. there are two more movies. It's a movie finale series. It seems like that's where anime is going more commonly now, where they like have, if they have a successful serialized show, they either follow it up with a theatrical production, and then when they get to the end of their life cycle, like the conclusion, they would end with a movie trilogy or a movie finale, which is neat. Very neat. One Punch Man, hopefully. I still watch shows through thick and thin. Right now though, Dr. Stone, like Dr. Stone's final season is coming soon. It's gonna be kind of bittersweet to see a show that's centered around the simplification but the dramatization of science. I absolutely love when the main character says "get excited" in Japanese. Like, well, now it's getting interesting, right? Aren't you guys excited? Anyways, sorry. A system of rules and regulation established by government or authority. Oh, by the way, that one show that you talked about, oh man, I forgot the name again. The drama, by coincidence, I watched like 7 of the episodes, and by coincidence it was available on Amazon Prime until it got delisted like 2 weeks ago. But I watched the first 7. Yeah, that is definitely a Japanese drama. It's such an interesting, you know how dramas, the cinematography, it's really neat though. I like their set is really great. It definitely reminds me that it's most definitely taking place in Osaka. Their set was pretty wild. It's a pretty large set that they had. It's cute, it's quaint. Your Asian dramas, very cute. Okay, Horitsu. Okay. Niwa, an outdoor area of land designed for cultivation, relaxation, or aesthetic enjoyment, right? We have Katsu. To achieve victory or success in a competition or battle. Seki, a design spot for sitting, right? Often in vehicles, theaters, or restaurants. Or position. Konya, period of time during the evening and night of the current day. There's another show that I don't think people talk about very often, but it's kind of like a sleeper appreciation, and that's Made in the Abyss. I have yet to go back to it. I had a pretty big hiatus until the movie came out, and then a follow-up. But Made in the Abyss, the first season was pretty wonderful. The act of seeking advice, guidance, or discussing a matter with someone. Right. Hold on. And then Tariru. Tariru, a verb meaning to have a quantity that's sufficient or adequate in different ways, both literally and figuratively. Qualifications. Refers to an action or occurrence that happens on a monthly basis. Okay. On a monthly basis. Okay. Maitsuki. A sudden shaking or trembling of the Earth's surface, often caused by tectonic activity. Okay. 地震. Okay. A journey made by an individual or group for business purposes. This one. Cho. Alright, let's see how we do. I think I might have forgotten one or two things. It's okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
最近の流行りに遅れないでついていくのは大変だ。
遅れないって、conjugated.
サンダルを履く。
Okay. Oh.
砂で泥団子を作る。
泥団子。泥団子。I mean, that does say mud dumpling. Or like a mud, like a mud package kit thing. So dumpling is interesting. Huh. Interesting. It's kind of cute. Another nani ga happened. Ah. All this ka. So past tense.
あなたに何が起こったのですか？
おった。ですか。Oh, I see. このように
歌ってください。
歌ってください。
レストランの店員。こちらがスープでございます。
Okay. 赤ちゃんに洋服を着せあげる。
赤ちゃんに洋服を着せてあげる。
私の父は会社で働いてる。
私の父は歯医者で働いている。
Oh, wait. Am I having a stroke? Oh, I keep typing shoe. Shoe. Okay, it's fine. I don't want to talk about it.
昼休みに友達とサッカーをして遊ぶ。
I kept typing yashumi, not yasumi.
この小説には翻訳がありますか？
その国よりその国の方が law が厳しいよ。
この国よりその国の方が法律が厳しいようだ。
Oh, I mean, 厳しいようだ。
広い庭がついた家に住みたいです。
卓球ね。いや、卓球。卓球の試合で、そう、招集。no、相手。相手に、beat? 勝つ。
卓球の試合で相手に勝つ。
すみません。この席は、empty って言いますか？It's just oh man, it's I. Oh, thanks. Okay. 相手いますか？
すみません、この席は空いていますか？
今夜の夜ご飯は何？
ねえそうやな。ねえさ、advice 聞いてくれるwhich one? I forgot which one. Oh no, I forgot which one for advice that they're talking about. Oh.
ねえねえ、相談を聞いてくれる？
ねえ、さ、all I can think of is さ、ねえ、その財布を買うには、2万円で enough かな？ enough. That doesn't.
その財布を買うには2万円で足りるかな？
あなたは毎月いくらもらっていますか？
東北地方で地震が起きました。
Oh, hey. The curve. They just threw it in like that. Oops.
出張で海外に10日間行く。
10日間行く。10日間。Man, I haven't seen tall in a while. The change in counter. Tall cut. Yeah, the first 10 days of the 10 days counting is pretty wild, actually. Filled with very interesting. Alright, so in the interest of time, we're gonna move along here. We're gonna squeeze in Hanzuhiro and then follow up with Wanikani. Wanikani is gonna take us till late. The goal is to do all 100, I'm guessing 150 to 160, but Wanikani also has reviews to do. So let's go to Hanzahiro, do our lessons, then move along to Wanikani as we have self-indulged a little bit. This is the big day, right? Wanikani is on a 6-day cycle now. Bunpro, it's kind of manageable. This volume is going to relax after this month a bit. And Bunpro, we have our cram month, which is good. Wanikani is going straight into July, so gotta keep our vigilance up. For now, it was a really fun choice. I think what has come to be a regular thing in Bunpro, which I'm gonna have to think about for the N3, N2, and N1 stuff, because I'm going to anticipate, here's an anticipation. When we get to N3, N2, and N1 stuff, it's gonna become even more nuanced in the sense of the stuff that I want to reflect on in English is gonna become very elaborate. So I don't know how you can call this like procrastination if it doesn't lead to the goal of learning Japanese, but I would say it's also a very welcoming thing, giving me the opportunity to revisit English. I think there's quite a lot of things now that I can use what Bunpro has written for me in order to draw analogies in English in reflection with age appropriate. And what I mean by age appropriate, I'm not talking about people age, but like language appropriate things, because I feel like I can definitely marry the stuff that I think about when I think about NetSpeak, and we're talking about English NetSpeak. It would be kind of fun to do a like try to evaluate Japanese NetSpeak if there's a large enough sample size that's accessible, maybe in the future. But English NetSpeak, how it coincides with the depiction of English grammar, because my English grammar is like 20 plus years out of date, so to speak. You might be making an argument like, but didn't you learn grammar and writing stuff when you were in science? That's scientific writing. Scientific writing is kind of like how Japanese language learners despise or like go out, you know, the loud ones, you know who you are. It's fine. You're very passionate about like saying, oh, this is textbook and this is natural, this is colloquial, and this is rigid and stiff. Scientific writing is very similar to that. The vast majority of the things I've written, even like long semantic monologues and soliloquies in the Discord with large ramblings and compound phrases and stuff, that doesn't end up in scientific writing. Scientific writing is incredibly concise, redundant, repetitious, or clarity. It's clarity to a fault. So like when something is something, it is something. When something is an approximation of something, it is an approximation of something, and it will continue to be an approximation of something. Using entirely fruity language, it can get you into trouble. Like, you know, it has a very high propensity of being suspicious. So nowadays, NetSpeak is kind of ironically a little bit like scientific writing, minus the data and the evidence, you know, the evidence and clarity following. It's like the beginning of scientific writing, the cursory knowledge. Like, what I would say is NetSpeak English is hearken to reading the abstract of a scientific report or journal and end there. That's all you ever read. So whenever someone's asking you to describe something, you get the abstract, and you must dig through communication and nuance and understanding by like way of looking at grammar or local patterns and whatnot. All of these things have an inherent place, and you can be able to wield it or utilize it in a way that could be functional, as opposed to like probing and insecurity. So I'm looking forward. Today, my major digression came from most of the grammar points. In fact, it's hard not to read what Bunpro has written without reflecting on my understanding of English communication, not linguistics, right? When specifically making sure to be very clear, I'm not attempting, or I'm trying not to overreach in linguistics, because I am not a linguist by training, nor am I that interested in being linguistically applicable. I'm also not an etymologist, so I'm not curious enough to track the whole history of like whatever the arrangement is. I'm specifically using my output, my interaction with other people, my observations of other people. And in order to remember these details, I organize the data. I organize the occurrences so that they can be reinforced on each other. So I look for patterns, much like seeing a sentence for the first time. I look for the pattern and I consistently try to work towards creating it. So anytime I learn a new grammar point, like today, how am I going to remember the 3 grammar points? By my like 2 or 3 hour discussion. Like, what were the 3 grammar points from today, right? Made, made ni, and mata, right? Those are the 3 grammar points. And that's kind of how I go about it most of the time. I create things, maybe not in the output of the desired outcome, but in order for me to remember things, I rely on both input and output. Whenever something is offered to me in explanation, I output it in the form of comprehension. And comprehension involves outputting in the context of something that I understand. I don't necessarily wholeheartedly rely on trying to beat myself over the head without blending all of it. So I understand quite a lot about English grammar because I chose to remember it through application. Whether it is natural for the construction of sentences, it doesn't have to be, in my opinion, necessarily. It can be part of the process. So oftentimes my English improved and my systematic writing, I have, Mika and I did this experiment actually. I have 3 or 4 ways I type in English, and they vary to certain degrees depending on who I'm speaking to. So it's unnatural, quote unquote, unnatural for most people, right? Some people are saying, don't you only have one way to speak? Like one style to speak, like your honest style, right? The summation of your style is like, no. I would be incredibly negligent and misleading if I told people that I speak and respond without considering them. Like, for example, when someone says you always speak your mind, you always speak like yourself, you're completely reliant on yourself, that's someone who might have a really strong identity. Now, having a strong identity doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like obligatory to your identity. I think those people who are incredibly reliant on speaking their way and only their way and projecting, the desperation sometimes can be a reflection of their insecurity about their identity. You don't have to prove that your identity is strong. You can act. Or, okay, that's about the same thing. You don't have to defend that your identity is strong. You can act like your identity is strong. Which, for me, each and every day, you can kind of consider it as acting, but not acting in the sense of getting your own personal manipulation or your opportunity. I like acting to see how well I can understand communication styles, right? It's all part of me. I enjoy the idea of studying vernacular and colloquialism as much as the next person, but I don't think I'm the same when it comes to projecting a defined way. I think humans are far more dynamic than they give themselves credit for sometimes. Like, oh, your heart and your brain can only necessitate one collection of rules and restrictions, as opposed to having the capacity to willingly construct and deconstruct blends for whatever appropriateness is required. So today was kind of my fun little exercise. I absolutely love reading grammar because it's contextualized no matter what. I love reading disjointed or jointed or full sentences or partial sentences or whatnot because it is in the mindscape. It is within the context of my abilities. I do not compartmentalize them, and that plays credence to being able to agree with someone on what they are suggesting, while at the same time present alternative cases that can be additional. I like the made, you know? I like the made, or the mata, sorry, mata. And also, additionally, right? Treading the same places, but it doesn't have to be quite the same actions. It might come to the end the same means, right? But actions can produce different results, largely because actions can be taken in a different manner. All right, so that's a wrap for our Bunpro today. If you're gonna watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu. As always, feel free to follow along, pick up Bunpro for yourself, give it a go. You're always welcome to share what type of Bunpro card triggers your wild contextual experience. It is, in my opinion, such a joy to learn grammar again. Like, it has been a while. It's been over 10 years since I've learned Spanish grammar. And then, you know, English grammar was definitely wonderful. Still haven't even done sentence diagramming yet. So we'll get to that at some point. So until next time, 皆さんまたね。見てくれてありがとう. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I'm gonna get up, walk around, stretch a little bit, and I'll be back for Hatsuhiro. Thank you.